I stood at the entrance of Zuasian restaurant, staring at Zhang Shi. A playful smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. This district governor, Zhao Defeng, was quite the actor. His son had just caused a massive scene in the restaurant, and now he was sending a messenger to apologize. On the surface, he was giving me face. In reality, he probably wanted to entertain me in a much more permanent way. Since the district governor was being so sincere, it would be rude of me not to go. I smiled and agreed, which caught Zhang Shi off guard. He clearly didn't expect me to say yes so easily. He gestured for me to follow, but I turned back to Lei Lai first. I told them to head back to the camp and that I'd be back soon. Lei Lai leaned in, his voice a low whisper. He told me it wasn't a good idea and that this felt like a trap. I just laughed. A trap? I wanted to see exactly what kind of dishes the district governor had prepared for me. I patted Lei Lai on the shoulder and told him not to worry. I knew what I was doing. I told him to tell my fifth sister-in-law that I might be home late. Lei Lai saw the determination in my eyes and finally nodded, telling me to take care. I watched them leave before turning back to Zhang Shi. The district governor's estate wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute walk. When we arrived, 2 armored guards stood at the gate like statues. They bowed as Zhang Shi led me inside. The place was massive and screamed luxury, filled with pavilions, artificial mountains, and flowing water. As I walked, I didn't just look at the scenery. I mapped the environment. I noted the guard positions, the patrol routes, and even the blind spots at every corner. In my mind, the Yanwang tactical system was running at high speed, digitizing the entire layout. Target building, district governor's estate. Area, 3,000 square meters. Guards, estimated 40 men. Weapons, long blades and crossbows. Threat level, medium. I already had my escape routes planned. The best option was scaling the East Garden Wall to reach the army camp. The backup was a forced breakout through the front gate with a 60% success rate. With that data in my head, I felt confident. Even if this was a death trap, I could get out alive. Zhang Shi stopped in front of an elegant, brightly lit building. Through the curtains, I could see a table overflowing with food and wine. I stepped inside. A middle-aged man in official robes sat at the head of the table. He was in his 50s with a long beard and a kind face, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. This was Zhao Defeng. He stood up and greeted me with a polite bow, apologizing for not meeting me sooner. I played along, offering my own apologies for the clash with his son earlier that day. He waved it off, calling it a misunderstanding between kids, and invited me to sit. I didn't hesitate. I sat directly across from him. He ordered Zhang Shi to bring out a bottle of 20-year-old New Air Hong wine. Zhao Defeng poured me a glass himself, claiming it was a special peace offering. I picked up the glass and caught the rich aroma. It was excellent wine, but I didn't drink it immediately. I joked that his hospitality was making me feel a bit embarrassed. He laughed, toasted to me, and drained his glass in one go. Only then did I take a small sip. It was smooth and sweet. For a while, we just chatted. We talked about the local customs of Yinmen Pass, the history of the Northern Prince's mansion, and the current state of the imperial court. I handled him easily, saying exactly what I needed to and not a word more. On the surface, we were 2 friends enjoying a meal. Underneath, we were 2 predators testing each other's boundaries. After a few rounds of drinks, Zhao Defeng's tone shifted. He put down his glass, his smile fading slightly. He brought up the precarious situation of the Northern Prince's mansion and the rumors about the court's attitude toward the Northern Army. I stayed silent and just watched him. He told me I was a smart man, and that smart men make smart choices. He suggested that instead of staying on a sinking ship, I should make plans for my future. He finally got to the point. He claimed to have connections with Minister Zhou in the capital, a man of great power. If I was willing, he could introduce me, promising me endless wealth and status. I finally understood. This dinner wasn't an apology. It was an invitation to defect. I finished my wine in one gulp. I told him I appreciated the offer, but I was a man of the Northern Prince's mansion. I was born a Shao, and I would die a Shao. I would never betray my family. The smile on his face froze. He sighed, asking why I would choose to go down with a sinking ship. I laughed at that. I told him he was mistaken. The Northern Prince's mansion wasn't a ship, it was a mountain. Even if the sky fell, that mountain would never move. I stood up and told him it was getting late. I thanked him for the meal and prepared to leave. Zhao Defeng's eyes flashed with a cold, dark light. He didn't try to stop me. He just ordered Zhang Shi to see me out. As I reached the gate, his voice drifted from behind me. He warned me that Yinmen Pass wasn't safe at night and told me to be careful. I looked back one last time. I told him my life was tough. Even the king of hell couldn't take it, let alone a few small-time thugs. I walked out into the deep night. The streets were empty, and my footsteps echoed on the stone pavement. I didn't head straight back. Instead, I turned into a narrow alley. Suddenly, I heard the whistle of wind behind me. I lunged to the side just as a crossbow bolt grazed my shoulder and slammed into the wall. They finally lost their patience. I turned around to see a dozen men in black masks stepping into the alley, their blades gleaming in the dark. Their leader gave a cold command to kill me, and they all charged at once. My gaze turned ice cold. My current body might be weak, but my combat instincts from my past life as a Special Forces instructor were still very much alive. Facing the charging men in black, I didn't meet them head-on. My current body was weak, so I used the narrow alley to my advantage, dodging and weaving through their blades. One man swung his sword at my neck. I stepped aside, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to fling him forward. He lost his balance and slammed headfirst into the stone wall, collapsing instantly. Another attacker tried to ambush me from behind. I didn't even look. I drove my elbow back with everything I had, catching him square in the face. Blood splattered, and he hit the ground wailing, clutching his shattered nose. But there were too many of them. My combat instincts were sharp, but my lungs were burning and my legs felt like lead. I started gasping for air, my movements growing sluggish. Damn it! I was reaching my limit. Suddenly, the heavy thud of boots echoed from the mouth of the alley. "Young Marshal!" Lei Lai roared, charging in with 20 men from the county camp. When he saw me surrounded, his eyes turned blood red. "You dare touch my young marshal? Seek death!" He dove into the crowd like a tiger among sheep. The men in black were no match for actual soldiers. In less time than it takes to drink a cup of tea, a dozen masked assassins were sprawling on the ground, dead or broken. Lei Lai ran to my side, his face pale with worry. "Young Marshal, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I said, waving him off as I caught my breath. "How did you find me?" Lei Lai scratched his head. I wasn't easy in my mind, so I stayed nearby to keep watch. Thank God we made it in time. A wave of warmth traveled through my chest. "You did well," I told him. I walked over to the one assassin left breathing and ground my heel into his chest. "Who sent you?" The man gritted his teeth, refusing to speak. I didn't waste words. I shifted my weight and snapped one of his fingers under my boot. He let out a blood-curdling shriek. "I'll ask one more time," I said coldly. "Who sent you?" I'll talk," he sobbed, his resolve crumbling. A cold light flashed in my eyes. I knew it. The alley reeked of blood. I stood over the terrified survivor, my expression unnervingly calm. I knelt down slowly, pulled a clean silk handkerchief from my robe, and began wiping phantom dust from my fingers as if I were strolling through a garden. "Governor Zhao Defeng," I whispered, the name tasting like poison. A playful smile touched my lips, but my eyes remained like ice. The man on the ground shook like a leaf. He had seen me dismantle his team. He knew the rumors of the useless ninth young master were a lie. I wasn't a sickling. I was a wolf in sheep's clothing. "Young Marshal, what do we do with this piece of trash?" Lei Lai asked, stepping forward with his dripping blade. "If you ask me, we should chop them all up and feed them to the dogs." The prisoner's eyes rolled back, and a foul stench filled the air as he wet himself in terror. I frowned, covering my nose with my folding fan, and stepped back. "Chopping them up is a waste," I said softly. Lei Lai blinked, looking confused. "Then what does the young marshal mean?" "Our northern prince's mansion is a place of etiquette," I said, snapping my fan shut and tapping it against my palm. "Since the governor went to such trouble to send me a gift, it would be rude not to return the favor." I looked at the bodies strewn across the pavement. "Clean this up. Arrange the bodies neatly, very neatly. Then find a cart and deliver these gifts, along with this live one, to the back gate of the governor's mansion." Lei Lai's eyes lit up with a predatory grin. "Young Marshal, you mean?" I interrupted, a wicked curve to my mouth. Keep it quiet. Don't wake the neighbors. Just drop them off and leave. And hang a sign on the survivor. What should it say? A favor returned. Our days ahead are long. Layli gave me a huge thumbs up. Brilliant. This will hurt that old dog more than a blade ever could. I'll get it done right now. As the soldiers began clearing the scene, my smile vanished. Zhao Defong wanted to play dirty. Fine. I wondered what his face would look like when he opened his back door tomorrow morning. I slipped away and headed back to the northern camp. As I approached the main tent, a piercing chill met me. A figure stood tall in the wind and snow like a spear. It was my eldest sister-in-law, Lu Hanyan. She was clad in dark red armor, her hand resting on her sword hilt, her sharp eyes fixed on me. Beside her stood my fifth sister-in-law, Wenryu, wrapped in thick furs. She was smiling, but the look didn't reach her eyes. Oh, our ninth young master is back, Wenryu said, her voice soft but stinging. I heard you were quite the hero tonight, smashing shops, visiting courtesans, and even becoming the governor's guest of honor. I acted like I didn't hear the sarcasm. I put on my best playboy grin and hurried forward. Eldest sister-in-law, fifth sister-in-law, why are you still up? Waiting for me? It's freezing out here. If you two get sick, my heart will break. Stop the act, Lu Hanyan snapped. Her sword cleared its scabbard by half an inch, gleaming in the moonlight. I can smell the blood on you from 10 paces away. I sighed, dropping the facade. Nothing escapes you, eldest sister-in-law. I signaled for Lei Lai and the others to leave. Once we were alone, my face turned serious. I ran into some trouble on the way back. Zhao Defong sent assassins to kill me. What? They both gasped, their faces turning pale. Lu Hanyan lunged forward, grabbing my shoulders to check for wounds. Her voice was frantic. Where are you hurt? Let me see. That Zhao Defong has a lot of nerve touching a member of the Shao family. I'll call the cavalry right now and level his mansion. She turned to grab her spear, her killing intent exploding like an enraged lioness. Eldest sister-in-law, calm down. I grabbed her wrist. Her arm was slender but packed with power, yet she froze when she felt the steady, unyielding strength in my grip. She looked back at me, stunned. I'm right here, aren't I? I said, my voice low and calm. Lei Lai handled the assassins. If Zhao Defong is desperate enough to strike now, it means we hit him where it hurts. We can't afford to be reckless. When Ryu finally recovered from the shock, as the one who managed the family's finances and intelligence, she knew I was right, but the fire in her eyes hadn't died down. When Ryu was always more observant than Lu Hanyan. She stepped forward quickly, grabbing Lu Hanyan's other hand to steady her. Eldest sister-in-law, Little Nine is right, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Smashing up the governor's mansion now is exactly what Zhao Defong wants. We'd be walking right into his trap. Even as she spoke, the fury in Wenryu's eyes burned just as bright as Lu Hanyan's. She looked at me, her expression hardening. But we aren't letting this go. I don't care if I have to spend every last cent the family owns. I will make Zhao Defong pay for touching you. Seeing their raw concern and protective rage, a warm current surged through my chest. In my past life, I was an orphan. I grew up in the cold, ruthless environment of the Special Forces, where no one watched your back unless it was tactical. I had never felt this, the feeling of being unconditionally protected by family. My body might have been weak, but these bonds were the most precious things I had ever owned. I let a confident smile spread across my face. Don't worry, sisters-in-law. I already sent Zhao Defong a little gift tonight. I think he's going to love it. Lu Hanyan stared at me, momentarily dazed. For a heartbeat, she looked like she saw the shadow of her late husband in my eyes. She took a deep breath, forcing her killing intent down, and slammed her sword back into its scabbard. Fine. Since you're not dead, get inside, she said, returning to her usual icy tone. Second sister is waiting for you. And since you had enough energy to get ambushed, we've doubled the dosage of your medicinal bath tonight. My face twitched. The 9 Deaths Rebirth soup was pure agony. It felt like being thrown into a giant stone mill and having every bone ground into powder. Even as a man made of iron, the thought of it made my scalp tingle. But I knew this was the only way to get stronger. Orders received, eldest sister-in-law. I joked, making a face before ducking into the tent. The next morning, the sky was just beginning to turn the color of a fish's belly. The giant drums of the northern camp hadn't even sounded yet, but my eyes were already wide open. I lay motionless on the cold cot, feeling the aftershocks of the power surging through my veins. Last night had been another session in purgatory. Under Shun Jingshu's supervision, the black medicinal liquid grew more potent by the day. The pain that seeped from the marrow of my bones was enough to make the toughest man collapse, but I had endured. I could feel my body transforming. The blocked meridians were being forcibly cleared and widened by the raw power of the medicine. My frail muscles and bones, after being repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt, were growing dense. I felt a heavy, resilient strength, like tempered steel. Damn, that hurts like a bitch, I muttered to myself, though I couldn't stop grinning. I sat up and clenched my fist. The air actually let out a dull pop. The shallow cuts from the assassins had already scabbed over thanks to Shun Jingshu's treatment, and now they just felt itchy as my muscles expanded. I moved my limbs, and my joints let out a series of cracks like dry beans popping in a pan. The soreness was intense, but the hidden strength beneath it was addictive. This was the 11th day of the treatment. If I could keep going, I would finally have a body worthy of my soul, the soul of the King of Hell. I threw on my standard soldier's leather armor and stepped out of the tent. The cold wind hit my face, smelling of frost and earth. But as I walked onto the drill grounds, I realized the atmosphere was off. Usually, the soldiers were sluggish and bleary-eyed at this hour. Today, tens of thousands of men stood as straight as pines. When they looked at me, their usual awe was replaced by something else. It was a mix of excitement, worship, and the kind of fanaticism people show toward an idol. "Morning, young Marshal." "Young Marshal, you were a total badass yesterday." A few veteran soldiers grinned at me, their teeth flashing. One of them even exaggeratedly rolled his shoulders, winking at me as if to say he had mastered my moves. I blinked, then it clicked. The stunt I pulled at the Drunken Immortal Inn and the governor's gates had already spread through the entire camp. Leilai marched toward me, his scarred face split by a massive, proud grin. "Young Marshal, I told the boys all about your glorious deeds yesterday." He was beaming, spit flying as he talked. The brothers all said it was incredibly satisfying. They said following a commander like you is the only way to live. I felt my lip twitch. "You just can't keep your mouth shut, can you? Didn't I tell you not to talk about it?" "Heh, I just couldn't help myself," Leilai said, acting like a big kid. Then he leaned in close, whispering like a conspirator. "Young Marshal, that donkey roll move you did. I spent all night thinking about it. It was a stroke of genius. You turned that Commander Zhao's face green, and he couldn't do a damn thing. You gotta teach me." "Get lost," I snapped. "That's a secret family technique. I don't teach outsiders." I ignored his pouting and looked at the ranks. "Where's Zhao Hu? What's the drill for today?" Zhao Hu ran over, his face flushed red from trying to suppress a laugh. Reporting to the young Marshal. "Today we're practicing weighted charges and coordinated defense." "Start the drills," I commanded, stepping right into the formation. The training felt different today. The soldiers were like they'd been injected with chicken blood, their roars shaking the sky. They didn't just see me as a commander who shared their hardships anymore. They saw me as the backbone of the army, the man who would take hits for them and give them back tenfold. The Northern Army had always been powerful, but because the old king was so strict, they often had to swallow their pride when dealing with local officials and rich merchants. Yesterday, I had used the most shameless, unreasonable methods to tell the world one thing: don't mess with the Shao family. If you do, I'll make your life a living hell. These men had been suppressed for a long time, and they loved every second of it. Halfway through the drills, a lavish carriage came tearing into the camp, ignoring all protocol. When Ryu jumped out before it even fully stopped, she was wearing a fiery red dress under a white fox fur cloak, looking like a streak of flame. She didn't say a word to anyone, heading straight for my tent. I finished the morning session and walked inside to find her pacing back and forth, frantically wringing a silk handkerchief. "Fifth sister-in-law, what's the emergency?" I asked, grabbing a water skin and taking a long gulp. When Ryu spun around. When she saw my calm face, she couldn't hold it back anymore. She rushed toward me, her voice trembling and her eyes turning red with emotion. "Little Nine, you're incredible. Are you some kind of god?" She pulled a thick stack of banknotes from her robe, her hands shaking. 100,000. A full 100,000 taels of silver. When Ryu's hands were shaking, that old fox, Qian Wansan, had sent the banknotes to the palace first thing in the morning. She told me she had already counted them 3 times. Not a single coin was missing. The man who delivered the money was pale, looking like a walking corpse. He said his boss begged for my mercy. When Ryu stared at me, her eyes shining with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She wasn't looking at her brother-in-law anymore. She was looking at a walking, talking mountain of gold. "This is just the beginning," I said. My voice was flat. To me, 100,000 taels of silver might as well have been 10 copper coins. I tossed the stack onto the table and wiped the sweat from my brow. I told her to take half and pour it into producing more burning knife liquor. I wanted a monopoly on the northern border's black market within a month. The other half was for the men. I wanted them to forget what hunger felt like. I wanted meat and grain in every bowl. When Ryu nodded immediately, she was completely won over. Yesterday, she thought I was a fool for smashing up a shop. Today, I had turned lead into gold. She calmed down, her brow furrowing. "Money isn't everything, Little Nine," she warned. Sihai Tong took a massive hit. Minister Zhou and Prime Minister Qin Song won't just sit back and watch. What's our next move? I took another long drink from my water skin and looked at her. I let a wicked smile tug at the corner of my mouth. I told her we were going to do absolutely nothing. The air in the tent froze. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. We had humiliated the governor, Zhao Defong. We had bled the merchant guild dry. Logic dictated we should either press the attack or dig in for a defense. She reached for my forehead, asking if I had a fever. She thought we were sitting ducks. I gently pushed her hand away. "You know business, fifth sister-in-law, but when it comes to psychological warfare, you listen to me." I walked over to the map of the northern border. They aren't afraid of the money I took. They're afraid because they don't know what else I have hidden. If I strike now, I'm walking into their trap. But if we just eat, drink, and stay behind closed doors, they'll drive themselves mad wondering what I'm plotting. Fear grows in the unknown. Let them panic. While they're busy guessing, I have one thing to do. I looked at my hands. They were pale and thin. I clenched them into fists. I needed to turn this sickly frame into a weapon of war. The following weeks were a nightmare for the men of the northern camp. They called it the madman's performance. The snow got deeper and the wind turned into ice, but I was always there on the drill grounds. I started at the back, struggling to keep up. Soon, I was leading the pack. I went from gasping after 100 swings to doing 2,000 in heavy iron armor without breaking a sweat. I was a monster that didn't know how to tire. On the 20th day, I collapsed during a cross-country run. My nose wouldn't stop bleeding. I woke up, downed a bowl of ginseng soup, and crawled back up to finish my laps. The army stayed silent. No one dared to make a sound. On the 35th day, the medicinal bath Shin Jingshu prepared turned a dark, angry red. He was adding centipedes, scorpions, and lethal poisons to the mix. The muffled screams coming from my tent at night made the guard's skin crawl. But every morning, I was back on the field, my eyes growing colder and more dangerous. Day 48 brought a massive blizzard. The wind cut like a blade. The drill grounds were empty, and even the elite troops were hiding from the storm. Except for me. I stood in the center of the snow, shirtless. My body heat was so intense that the snowflakes evaporated before they even touched my skin. Inside, my mind was running through special forces tactics from my past life. My body was a river of fire, the medicine finally hitting the final barrier. Leilai watched me from the barracks window, his voice trembling. He thought I was insane. Lu Hanyin just watched, her knuckles white as she gripped the window frame. She knew. She could feel my presence changing. It wasn't just energy, it was a primal awakening. A beast was baring its fangs. On the 49th night, the atmosphere in my tent was suffocating. Shin Jingshu was drenched in sweat. The tub in front of me was filled with a liquid so red it looked like fresh blood. This was the final stage, rebirth by fire. "This is the bone-shattering stage," he whispered. "The medicine will crawl into your marrow and break everything down to rebuild it. The pain is worse than being flayed alive. He told me his ancestors had tried this. 2 died. One went mad and bit off his own tongue. He asked if I was ready. I didn't answer with words. I stripped off my clothes. My body wasn't the skeleton it used to be. The muscles were lean, tight, and packed with explosive power. The scars across my skin looked like jagged metals in the candlelight. I was ready. I looked at my second sister-in-law, Shinjingshu. There was no fear in my eyes. I felt a strange, unsettling calm. I asked her if she knew about the eagle. She froze, confused. I told her that when an eagle reaches 40 years old, its claws grow too long and curved to hunt. Its feathers become heavy and thick. It faces a choice: die or undergo a painful rebirth. The eagle must fly to a mountain peak and smash its beak against the rocks until it falls off. Then it waits for a new beak to grow so it can pluck out its own claws and feathers. It endures 150 days of agony to live another 30 years. I smiled at her, a wild, arrogant grin. If a beast has the courage to trade its life for a new one, why wouldn't I? I didn't hesitate. I stepped directly into the boiling, blood-red medicinal liquid. The moment my skin hit the water, a roar erupted from my throat. It sounded like a dying beast. The pain was beyond description. It felt like 1,000 white-hot steel blades were stabbing into my body, scraping against my bones. It felt like 10,000 poisonous ants were burrowing into my marrow to feast. I bit down hard on the wooden bit in my mouth. The veins in my neck bulged like writhing worms. My body convulsed violently, sending massive splashes of water over the sides of the tub. Shin Jingshu screamed for help. Lu Hanyan and Wen Ruyu rushed forward, pinning my shoulders down with all their strength. Hanyan's eyes were red with tears. She could feel my body vibrating with agony under her palms. She felt the hell I was walking through. My consciousness began to flicker. In my mind, the Yama sandbox was flashing red alerts. It warned me that my pain receptors were overloaded. My heart rate hit 220. It suggested an immediate emergency shutdown to protect my brain. Shut it off, I roared in my mind. I refused to faint. If I lost consciousness now, my will would slacken and the medicinal power would run wild. I would become a cripple forever. I wanted to feel every ounce of this pain. I wanted to witness my weak, pathetic bones being crushed so they could grow back as steel. I am the king of hell. The debts owed to the Shao family haven't been paid yet. Time felt like it stretched for a century. Just as I felt my soul was about to turn to ash, a crisp crack echoed from inside my body. A cool current rose from my dantian, racing through my limbs. The tearing pain receded like a tide. It was replaced by a sensation I had never felt before. It was power. Pure, violent, endless power. I stood up abruptly. The liquid that had been blood red was now as clear as plain water. I had swallowed every drop of the medicine's essence. Han Yin and Ruyu backed away in shock, their hands trembling. They stared at me. I stood naked in the tub, water dripping off muscles that looked like they were carved from marble. My sickly paleness was gone, replaced by a healthy bronze glow. My eyes were deep and piercing. For a moment, it looked like lightning flashed behind my pupils. When Ruyu covered her mouth, unable to believe what she was seeing, the sickly boy who could barely walk was gone. Standing before her was a god of war. I looked at my hands and slowly closed them into fists. The feeling of total control was intoxicating. I was finally back. Later, inside the central command tent, the air was dead silent. I stood with my back to the entrance, staring at the massive map of the northern border. The 49 days of hell had crushed and rebuilt every inch of my skeleton. I could hear the sound of my own body. My blood didn't flow like a stream anymore. It surged like a river of underground lava. Every heartbeat pushed that heat through me, giving me a terrifying sense of dominance. I raised my left hand, fingers spread wide. With a single thought, I snapped my hand shut. A dull pop echoed through the tent. It wasn't my knuckles. It was the air itself being compressed and crushed in my palm. Lu Hanyan was nearby, cleaning her sword with a piece of deerskin. She froze. She looked at my back and felt a chill. I was the same person, but I felt like a black spear ready to pierce the heavens. The aura I gave off wasn't sickly or dark anymore. It was heavy, like solid stone, filled with a bloody heat that made even a martial arts master like her tremble. She had seen many experts in her life. Her father was a peak grandmaster, and my father, the Prince of Northern Peace, had been a legend. But the danger coming from me was different. It was primal. I finally turned around. When our eyes met, Hanyan's pupils shrunk. She gripped her sword hilt instinctively. My eyes were like bottomless pits, flickering with thunder and the shadows of a sea of blood. She felt like she was being hunted by a prehistoric beast. Her muscles tensed, and her inner energy began to circulate on its own. It was a pure survival reflex. "Issue my military order," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it hit like a hammer. I told her to sign the highest-level Black Feather Order immediately. I wanted every commander and general from the south, west, and east camps to bring their personal guards. They were to gather at the North Camp drill grounds by noon tomorrow. Hanyan was stunned. Her prideful eyes filled with disbelief and horror. She asked if I was crazy. The Black Feather Order was only for when the dynasty was facing total destruction. Since the founding of the country, it had only been used 3 times. Every time, it meant a massacre. She told me I had no authority to move troops like this. It was treason. The imperial court would see it as a rebellion. She reminded me that the veteran generals had served my father for decades. They only respected military merit and strength. She started to ask why they would listen to a 20-year-old who couldn't even hold a sword, but she stopped. She looked at me again and realized her mistake. I simply nodded. I told her she was right. My voice was calm, but the air around me felt heavy. I knew what they thought of me. Everyone thought Xiao Chun was a useless waste. I looked at Hanyan and asked her if that was true. I told her that was exactly why I wanted them to come. My voice suddenly rose, cutting through the silence of the tent. I wanted them to see for themselves. I wanted them to look at the 9th son they despised and decide if I was worthy of leading the 300,000 men of the Jinbei army. Tomorrow, in front of every single soldier, I was going to make an announcement. I took a sudden step forward, closing the distance between us until we were less than a foot apart. I looked her dead in the eye. This wasn't just about pride. This was about the survival of the Shao family. It was about the future of every brother in this army. My voice dropped to a low, magnetic hum. I could see her pupils trembling as she listened. I leaned in closer. I told her she knew the truth. My father and brothers didn't die by accident. The imperial court already had the blade at our necks. The prime minister, Qin Song, wanted to pull the Shao family up by the roots and burn us to ash. And the Jinbei army? It was a mess. 300,000 men scattered across 4 camps, each acting like their own little kingdom. The veteran generals were arrogant, clutching their power and refusing to cooperate. Without my father, the army was just a pile of loose sand. My voice turned sharp. When my father was alive, he held them together with his reputation and his victories. But he was gone. I asked her who was going to lead them now. Her? Our elderly grandmother? Hanyan couldn't answer. She knew I was right. Ever since the old prince died, the generals only pretended to follow orders while doing whatever they pleased. I told her I was going to fix it. I wasn't going to use my name or my status. I was going to use absolute, crushing strength to make them shut up. I was going to make them submit. Then, I gave her one more order. I told her to send word back to the palace. I wanted my grandmother and all my sisters-in-law to be at the drill grounds by noon tomorrow. Hanyan swallowed hard. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to argue, but the sickly boy she used to protect was gone. The man standing in front of her didn't need protection. She asked me if I had really thought this through. She warned me that once the Black Feather Order went out, there was no turning back. The entire North would shake, and the imperial court would react. I laughed. It was a cold, mocking sound. I asked her what it mattered if they thought we were rebels. Their knives were already at our throats. Did she want us to just stretch out our necks and wait for the blow? Or should we show them that the Shao family's blades were still sharp? I softened my gaze slightly. I told her the official reason for the order was to discuss border defense against the Black Wolf tribe. It was our duty to protect the North. Even if the court wanted to find fault, they couldn't. Hanyan realized I had covered my tracks. The Black Feather Order was extreme, but with the threat of the tribes looming, it was technically legal. But she was still worried about the generals. She feared they would challenge me and ruin my authority. I cut her off. I told her they wouldn't dare. I gave her a final instruction. Tell them that if they weren't at the platform by noon tomorrow, they would be executed. I said the word execute with a chilling finality. There was no screaming, no outward rage, just a cold, ironclad promise. Hanyin shuddered and stepped back. She realized I wasn't joking. I was actually going to kill anyone who disobeyed. She stared at me for a long time before finally whispering that I had changed. I just smiled and walked back to the tactical map, turning my back to her. I told her that in this world, if you don't change, you die. Hanyin didn't say another word. She turned and sprinted out of the tent, her heart racing. Outside, I heard her roar for Leilai. She ordered the swiftest horses to carry the Black Feather Order to the south, east, and west camps. The command was simple. Every general must arrive by noon tomorrow with their personal guards. Anyone late would face the sword. Leilai's voice boomed in response. The camp erupted into a frenzy of activity. I heard the frantic hoofbeats of horses galloping away. The soldiers were buzzing. They knew the Black Feather Order hadn't been used in 10 years. They wondered if a war was coming. Inside the tent, I looked at Yinmen Pass on the map. I ran my fingers over the border. I whispered to my father and brothers, telling them to watch. The old era of the Jinbei army died with them. Tomorrow, a new era would begin. My era. I clenched my fist. I would use the blood of the defiant to lay the foundation of my power. As the sun began to set, 3 messengers rode out like shooting stars, carrying a storm with them. The next morning, news reached the Shao family estate. In the accounting room, the clicking of the abacus stopped abruptly. When Ruyu, my 5th sister-in-law, dropped her expensive sandalwood abacus. The jade beads scattered across the floor. She stood up, her eyes wide with shock. She asked if I had really lost my mind. She was terrified that I would destroy the last bit of respect the Shao family had left by failing to control the generals. She immediately ordered a carriage for the North Camp. Meanwhile, at the training grounds, a massive 300-pound stone weight slammed into the dirt, cracking the ground. My 4th sister-in-law, Zhongli Yin, wiped the sweat from her face. Her muscles were tense and full of energy. When she heard the news, a wild, fiery light erupted in her eyes. She let out a loud, booming laugh that shook the weapon racks. She said the kid finally had some guts. She had been waiting for something like this for a long time. Finally, he stopped acting like a turtle hiding in its shell. The Black Feather Order. Now, that's a true son of the Shao family. I grabbed my Thunderdrum gold hammers and headed for the North Camp. If those old geezers dared to cause trouble, I'd use their bones to soften my hammers. In the secret room of the Windrain Tower, my 3rd sister-in-law, Su Mei, reacted with a chilling calmness. Under the dim candlelight, she held a secret message between her fingertips. The paper instantly turned to ash. She whispered that Zhao Defong had already made a move and Qin Song's spies were sniffing around the North Camp. A thoughtful look crossed her cold face. She wondered if I was trying to establish authority or completely reshuffle the deck. She stood up, her black skin-tight suit highlighting her leopard-like grace. She ordered the entire Windrain Tower to mobilize. Every secret guard was sent to blockade the camp. Anyone approaching without permission was to be killed on sight. Soon, several carriages and galloping horses charged out of the Jinbei prince's mansion. We were all heading toward the eye of the storm. As the sun rose higher, the air at the training grounds felt frozen. The place was packed. The commanders of each battalion had arrived with their elite guards. Even though all 300,000 men weren't there, the 40,000 battle-hardened veterans gathered together created a killing intent so thick that birds refused to fly overhead. But that intent was mixed with clear resentment. A heavy horsewhip slammed into a wooden post, sending splinters flying. Zhao Taizhan, the commander of the West Camp, was red-faced with rage. He had followed my father for 30 years, and now he looked like an enraged lion. He roared, asking where that brat Xiaochun was. He jumped off his horse, his heavy armor clanking. He pointed at the main tent and screamed. He had been practicing the wedge formation to deal with the Black Wolf tribe, but I had summoned him with the Black Feather Order for what he assumed was some trivial nonsense. He swore that if I wasted his time, he'd whip me to death on behalf of my father. Leilai rushed over, sweating and forced a smile. He begged the old general to calm down, saying I had my own arrangements. Zhao Taizhan shoved him aside so hard that Lei Lai stumbled back 2 steps. He spat out that a kid who only knew how to read poetry and visit brothels knew nothing about military affairs. He said the only reason he even showed up was out of respect for the late prince. Otherwise, the Black Feather Order in my hands would be a joke. Li Hu, the commander of the East Camp, walked up with a sneer. He agreed, mocking the idea of a weak scholar giving orders to the Jinbei army. He wondered if I was using the Black Feather Order as a toy. These old generals were proud. They had earned their stripes in piles of corpses. With my father and brothers dead, they were full of suppressed fire and despair. They weren't afraid to die, but they were terrified of following a useless leader who would lead the army's 100-year glory into a grave. Lu Hanyan stood below the command platform, listening to these harsh truths. She gripped her sword so hard I thought it might shatter. She wanted to tell them I had changed, but she remembered my orders. No matter what happened, she had to endure until I stepped out. Just as things were about to spiral out of control, a gentle but firm voice rang out. My second sister-in-law, Shen Jingshu, stepped out of a carriage. She looked pale from the 49 days of exhausting work, but her eyes were bright. She looked directly at the angry generals. She reminded them that they had watched me grow up. She argued that if I used the highest level order, I must have a reason. She asked them if they didn't trust my ability. Did they at least still trust the Shao bloodline and the old matriarch? Her words were soft, but carried weight. She used the old matriarch's reputation to steady the room. Zhao Taizhan snorted, and though he still looked angry, he backed off. Shen Jingshu was a military doctor who had saved countless lives in this camp. These rough men had to respect that debt. He slammed his helmet onto the ground and sat on a stone block. He muttered that he'd wait to see what I had to say, but if I couldn't give him a real answer, he'd punish me himself. The sun climbed higher. The training ground grew more crowded and quieter. Aside from the whistling wind, there was only the sound of thousands of men breathing and the occasional snort of a horse. Everyone stared at the empty command platform. A large chair covered in white tiger skin sat there. It was my father's seat, the sacred altar of the Jinbei army. The old matriarch has arrived, a loud voice announced. The crowd parted like a tide. A black carriage rolled in, its wheels crunching against the frozen earth. The curtain lifted, and the old matriarch, supported by my 8th sister-in-law Shao Linger, stepped down with immense dignity. She wasn't in casual clothes today. She wore her formal black and gold robes and held her dragon-headed cane, a gift from the late emperor. Her hair was white and her wrinkles were deep, but her eyes were piercing. Respects to the old matriarch. In an instant, everyone, from stubborn generals like Zhao Taizhan to the lowest soldier, dropped to one knee. The sound of clashing armor echoed through the sky. It was a display of absolute respect for the pillar of the Shao family. She told them all to rise. Her voice was hoarse, but full of authority. She didn't sit in the tiger-skin chair. She had a seat placed beside it. Her gaze swept over the crowd like lightning, landing on the frustrated generals. She noted that Zhao Tieshan's temper was still like a firecracker. Zhao Tieshan's face reddened. With tears in his eyes, he told her he wasn't trying to be difficult. He said the situation was dire and the army couldn't handle any more turmoil. He pointed out that I had never led troops or even killed a chicken. The old matriarch tapped her cane. She reminded him that even my father was a terrified greenhorn during his first battle. She said no one was born a god of war. Zhao Taizhan slapped his thigh in frustration. He argued there was no time for me to learn. The court's blade was at their necks, and the Black Wolf tribe was sharpening their swords outside the pass. He said they needed a leader who could step up immediately, a wolf, not a student who needed to be taught how to hold a knife. The old matriarch went silent. Her grip on her cane tightened until her knuckles turned white. She knew he was right. This wasn't just his worry. It was the worry of the entire 300,000-man army. Her heart was racing too. Though she knew I had been working hard in the camp, she hadn't seen the results yet. She wondered if the child she raised could really carry the 100-year glory of the Shao family. The old matriarch sat there, her heart heavy with the weight of our entire family's survival. I knew what she was thinking. She was gambling everything, the lives of the widows, the orphans, and the Shao legacy, on my shoulders. Under her calm expression, her palms were soaked with sweat. She was praying I wouldn't let her down. If I failed this test, The Shao family was truly finished. A suffocating silence gripped the camp. Then, a heavy footstep echoed from the shadows of the main tent. Thud. The first sound wasn't loud, but it was heavy. It felt like a sledgehammer striking everyone's chest. The whispering crowd went dead silent. Thud. The second step had a strange rhythm. It wasn't rushed, nor was it slow. The interval between each step was perfect, showing absolute calm and control. Thud. The third step landed as a long, powerful hand pulled back the heavy curtain. The wind seemed to stop. The north wind that usually howled over the training grounds felt like it was being choked by the sheer pressure coming from that hand. It wasn't a delicate hand. It was rough, bronzed like tempered copper, with veins snaking across the back like sleeping dragons. Then, a black combat boot stepped firmly onto the frozen earth. Thud. That step landed right on the beat of everyone's heart. I walked out. As I stepped into the pale midday sun, the tens of thousands of soldiers fell into a deathly silence. Who is that? Zhao Tieshan's jaw dropped so low he could have swallowed an egg. He couldn't believe his eyes. Was this the sickly ninth young master? I was clad in heavy black armor, the black iron python armor. It was my father's armor, the legendary General Shao Zhanqing. It was forged from cold pool iron and weighed over 60 pounds. A normal man couldn't even walk in it without immense strength, but on me, it looked like a second skin. Every plate hugged my muscles perfectly. With every movement, the metal clanked with a heavy, oppressive rhythm. It was a display of pure, violent beauty. I hadn't put on a helmet. My ink-black hair was tied back simply with a grass rope, revealing a face with sharp, chiseled angles. My features hadn't changed, but the gloom and sickly pallor were gone. In their place was a cold, murderous aura that made people shiver just by looking at me. I stood at the tent entrance, squinting against the light. In the back of my mind, the Yama tactical map was spinning at high speeds. Data streamed past my eyes like a waterfall. Target group, Northern Army Elite. Count, 53,200 men. Morale analysis, extremely low. War weariness, 60%. Anger, 30%. Contempt, 10%. Core target, West Camp Commander, Zhao Taizhan. Threat level, medium. Personality, hot-headed, respects the strong. Tactic, use absolute force to intimidate the leaders. Use extreme empathy to stir the ranks. A faint, unreadable smile played on my lips. I moved. One step, then two. I walked slowly, but every step was rock solid. The 60-pound armor felt weightless. Under the gaze of tens of thousands, I climbed the steps to the command platform, the symbol of supreme power in the Northern Army. As I passed Zhao Taizhan, I paused. He instinctively wanted to shout a question, but when he met my eyes, the curses died in his throat. His eyes widened. My gaze was dark as smoke, bottomless. For a second, he felt like he wasn't a battle-hardened general, but a piece of prey locked in the sights of an apex predator. He swallowed hard, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. I looked away and continued to the center of the platform. I turned to face the old matriarch, who sat to the side. In an instant, my murderous aura vanished, replaced by the respect of a grandson. I dropped to one knee, my armor clashing loudly against the wood. Grandson Shao Chun has kept grandmother waiting. My voice was deep and resonant. It cut through the biting wind, reaching every ear in the camp. The old matriarch's hand trembled on her cane. Her eyes filled with tears. I looked so much like my father. The stature, the presence, the voice. It was like seeing him again. Good child, she choked out. She tried to stand up to reach for me, but my sister Shao Linger held her back. This was the command platform. This was the military. Right now, I wasn't just her grandson. I was the commander-in-chief. I stood up and slowly turned around. As I did, my full presence exploded. I gripped the cold railing of the platform, leaning forward slightly as I looked down at the sea of 40,000 soldiers. I didn't speak immediately. I just watched them. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3, 10 full seconds of silence. It was more agonizing than any scream. It felt like a bowstring being pulled tighter and tighter, right until the point of snapping. Finally, someone broke. Ninth young master. Zhao Taizhan roared, stepping forward. If you called us here just to show off your new outfit, I don't have time for this. My horses need feeding, and my men need training. I don't have time to play house with you. The crowd erupted. The silence shattered into a wave of murmurs and complaints. They were hungry, they were cold, and they felt like they were being mocked by a pretty boy in his father's clothes. My sister-in-law, Lu Hanyin, turned pale, her hand flying to her sword hilt. But then I laughed. It was a cold, wicked sound. Playing house. My voice wasn't loud, but I used the vocal techniques I had learned in the special forces. It boomed like muffled thunder over the field, drowning out every other sound. Zhao Taizhan, you think I'm playing? I drew the broken blade from my waist in one swift motion. The steel flashed in the sun. I pointed it at the thousands of soldiers below, my eyes full of blatant contempt. Look at yourselves. Slouching, starving, looking like you've already given up. This is the #1 army under heaven. These are the Shao family riders that the Black Wolf tribe is supposed to fear? To me, you don't look like wolves. You look like a flock of sheep waiting to be slaughtered. You're just a bunch of useless failures who only know how to complain and wait for death. The crowd exploded in a fury. These men lived with their heads on the line every day. They could endure hunger and cold, but they could not endure being insulted, especially by someone they considered a weakling. What did you just say? They roared back. You think because your name is Xiao, we're afraid of you? Zhao Taizhan spat, his voice dripping with venom. I was killing men while you were still wetting your bed. The crowd erupted. If looks could kill, I would have been hacked into 1,000 pieces right there. But that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted them angry. I stopped laughing. My expression turned deadly serious, shadowed by a flicker of sorrow. Angry? Good. You should be. I slowly lowered my broken blade. I let my gaze drift over their faces, distorted with rage, weathered by war. When I spoke again, my voice was low and raspy, carrying a weight that cut through the wind. You say I was wetting my bed? Fine. But I know things, Zhao Taizhan. I know you haven't been paid in 3 months. The field went silent. Dead silent. I know you're eating moldy grain and rotten vegetable leaves every single day. I know the cotton in your winter coats is so thin and matted that the wind cuts straight to your bones. I pointed a finger at an old soldier in the front row. His hands were covered in frostbite, raw sores weeping yellow pus. I know you have wives and children to feed back home, but you can't even send a single copper back to them. I know you watch your brothers die beside you, one by one, while the imperial court's compensation money never even shows up. With every I know, the anger on their faces began to stiffen. The fury turned into confusion, and then, finally, into a raw, aching sense of grievance. It was a pain they had suppressed for far too long. These men were heroes. They bled at Yinmen Pass to protect the great Xia Empire. So why were they starving? Why were they being treated like garbage by the officials drinking hot tea in the capital? The cold wind howled, kicking up blood-stained dust that stung our faces. Many of the veteran soldiers lowered their heads, their eyes reddening as they bit their lips to keep from breaking. I took a deep breath, gathering every bit of strength in my lungs. I roared the question that had been rotting in their hearts for months. I have only one thing to ask you. Are you suffocating? That roar hit the field like a thunderbolt, shattering the numbness of 30,000 souls. I didn't use flowery words or complex logic. I used 3 simple words that acted like red-hot pincers, grabbing them by their souls. Are you suffocating? An old soldier in the front, his eyes clouding with tears, finally broke. He thought of his starving child. He thought of his wife's letters, every line asking if the pay had arrived. He was a man who could take a blade to the chest without flinching, but now, his shoulders shook uncontrollably. They were suffocating. The air in their chests had been blocked for too long, burning their insides. They were the Northern Army. They were the Shao family's pride. They were the shield of the empire. And for their loyalty, they were rewarded with neglect, hunger, and the sight of their brothers freezing to death. Zhao Tieshan's face, previously flushed with rage, turned ghost white. He opened his mouth to argue, but my question was a thorn driven straight into his heart. Wasn't he suffocating too? As a commander, he had begged the governor for grain, only to be turned away with excuses about imperial regulations. He had sent blood-stained reports to the capital, only for them to vanish into a void. Are you angry? I shouted, stepping to the very edge of the platform. My eyes burned like twin fires. Do you feel wronged? Do you want to curse their mothers? I leaned forward, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and grief. I'll tell you something. I'm suffocating too. My father, Xiao Zhan, guarded this border his entire life. He died on the battlefield, his body wrapped in horsehide. My 8 brothers fought since they were children. Every one of them was a decorated hero. And every one of them died right here at Yinmen Pass. We couldn't even find enough of their remains to bury them properly. I slammed my fist into the cold stone railing. The sound cracked like a bone breaking. The Xiao family gave every drop of our blood. And what did we get in return? An imperial decree to strip us of our power. We got a pack of wolves eyeing my widowed sisters-in-law like they were pieces of meat to be divided. And we got you, 30,000 of the finest men in the north, who can't even get a damn full meal. I looked up at the sky and screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. Why? Why do the heroes who protect the country have to starve while the parasites in the capital live in luxury? Why do we bleed on the front lines while they plot to steal our pay and drive us to our deaths? Why? The dam finally broke. It started with one man's cry, and then a landslide of sound followed. A tidal wave of roars shook the earth, loud enough to change the color of the sky. Why? We won't take it. Screw them. Thousands of hardened men were crying like children, shaking their fists, screaming the foulest curses they knew. They were finally venting the despair they had carried for years. Below the stage, Lu Hanyan's eyes were bloodshot. She had always believed a soldier's duty was to obey and suffer in silence. But today, I had ripped the scab off the wound, letting the rot spill out into the sunlight. It was painful, but it was necessary. When Ryu clenched her fists so hard her nails drew blood. She knew the family's finances were a black hole. She had sold her own dowry just to keep us afloat. My words were her own heart's cry. Even the old matriarch, sitting in her chair, let tears roll down her wrinkled face. She looked at me, her grandson, standing there like a god of war, and felt a surge of pride. The hidden dragon of the Xiao family had finally awakened. I didn't stop them. I let them scream. I let the resentment wash over the field. You can't fill a cup that's already full of poison. You have to empty it first. Slowly, the noise died down. The soldiers stood there, panting, their eyes red. But the numbness was gone. In its place was a dangerous, flickering heat. They looked at me differently now. I wasn't just a pampered young master anymore. I was one of them. I was the man who understood their pain. I know shouting slogans won't fix anything, I said, my voice cutting through the newfound silence. I stopped shouting. I let my voice drop, becoming steady and cold. From that moment on, I, Xiao Chun, was in charge of the North Army. I didn't care if the imperial court refused to pay us. I didn't care what the fat officials in the capital thought. I looked at the sea of soldiers and made them 3 promises. I held up one finger, my voice ringing out like iron. First, I told them that starting this month, everyone's pay would double. For every brother who had died in battle, their families would receive 10 times the usual pension. I told them I would find the money. Even if I had to rob the wealthy or sell every last piece of the Xiao family estate, I wouldn't let them go without. The crowd gasped. Then, a wave of pure, disbelieving joy washed over the field. I held up a second finger. I promised them that the food in the North Camp would be the standard for the entire army. I wanted every man to eat meat at every single meal. I wanted them to have new clothes and to grow strong and thick-necked. I needed them to have the strength to hack off our enemies' heads. A roar went up that shook the ground. To these hardened men, the promise of meat was more intoxicating than any speech. Finally, I held up a third finger. My voice turned into a blade of ice, and a killing intent flooded the air. I promised them that every person who had a hand in my father's and brother's deaths would pay. Every corrupt official who stole their rations, and every piece of scum who looked down on the North Army would be hunted. I told them we would twist their heads off with our own hands. We would use their blood to honor our dead and their skulls as our chamber pots. The army went absolutely feral. They were screaming, chanting for blood and for me. Thousands of voices merged into a single wave of warlust that pierced the clouds. In that moment, rules and laws didn't matter anymore. To these soldiers, the man who fed them and led them to revenge was their only god. I stood on the stage, holding my blade high as it caught the sun. I knew right then that I held the soul of this army in the palm of my hand. I lowered my left hand, and the chaos vanished instantly. The silence was eerie, broken only by the snapping of the heavy flags in the wind. Thousands of eyes were locked on me, no longer filled with doubt, but with a terrifying, fanatical respect. I stood there with my blade pointed at the dirt, the blood-red groove on the steel gleaming in the pale light. I told them we were done talking about money and food. Now, it was time to talk about killing. Zhao Taizhan stepped forward, his face dark with a murderous energy. He asked if I meant the Black Wolf tribes across the border. He was ready to leave the West camp right then and there to take thousands of heads. I smiled, but it was a cruel, jagged expression. I told him we weren't in a hurry to leave just yet. We had to kill the wolves outside, yes. But first, we had to kill the fleas hiding in our own clothes. The air seemed to freeze. I slammed the pommel of my blade into the stone railing with a deafening crack. I asked them how my father, a man who knew every inch of this land, could have been lured into a death trap like White Wolf Valley. I asked how my 8 brothers, each a legendary warrior, could be surrounded and slaughtered without a single person escaping to bring word. The questions hit the generals like thunderbolts. Their faces turned pale as the realization set in. A traitor. There was a traitor in the North Army. Zhao Taizhan turned bright red, his eyes bulging as he defended his brothers. He told me that every man here had put their lives on the line for my father. He demanded evidence, claiming my words were like a knife to their hearts. I gave him a cold laugh. He wanted evidence. I didn't need scrolls or witnesses. I activated the Yama tactical sandbox. The world around me lost its color, fading into a gray, digital model. The thousands of men before me turned into pulsing red dots, heartbeats. I scanned them like a precision radar. Zhao Taizhan was at 110 beats per minute, fueled by anger and loyalty. Liu was at 105, shocked but clean. I swept my gaze across the ranks until I locked onto the front of the South camp. There stood a chubby, honest-looking commander. He was known as a good old man. In the army, a guy who gave his own rations to new recruits. He was standing there with his head bowed, looking like he was mourning my father. But in my vision, he was glowing a violent, angry red. His heart rate was 142 beats per minute. He was in a state of extreme panic. His pupils were blown wide, and his adrenaline was spiking so hard his fingertips were vibrating. His eyes were darting every half second, subconsciously looking for an escape route. I found him. I stepped off the stage, my heavy iron boots thudding against the frozen ground. I walked slowly, each step heavy and deliberate. I was a mountain moving toward him, and the pressure in the air became so thick it was hard to breathe. I was coming for his life. The pressure I radiated was so intense the frontline generals could barely breathe. I moved through the crowd like a ghost. I ignored Zhao Tieshan's confused stare and Li Hu's attempt to speak. My heavy black boots finally came to a halt right in front of the formation. "Qianzhen," I said. My voice was soft, eerily calm, like a junior greeting an elder. It was a sound that made skin crawl. Qianzhen flinched as if I'd poked him with a needle. He struggled to look up. His face, usually known for its honest and simple expression, was twitching uncontrollably. He forced a smile that looked more painful than crying. Young Marshal, you must be joking," he stammered. "It's freezing out here. How could I be hot?" "Not hot." The small smile on my lips vanished. In its place was a void of ice. I lunged forward, my left hand snapping out like a viper to grab his wrist. I yanked his arm high into the air for everyone to see. "If you aren't hot, why is your palm covered in cold sweat?" My voice boomed like a thunderclap in his ear. Qianzhen's hand was splayed open, and wet perspiration actually dripped from his fingertips onto the frozen ground. I'm just feeling unwell," Qianzhen stammered, his eyes darting wildly, looking for any way out. "Unwell? A fine excuse. A truly fine excuse." I took a violent step forward, my blood-red eyes locking onto his pupils, staring straight into his filthy soul. "Let me ask you. 3 months ago, the Black Wolf tribe bypassed the main pass at Yinmen and launched a precision strike on our grain supply. That route was a top-secret path known only to commanders and above. We lost 30,000 stones of grain and 800 men died. Qianjun. Young Marshal, listen to me. He tried to interrupt. I didn't give him a second to breathe. I pressed closer, my killing intent crashing down on him like a landslide. 2 months ago, at the Battle of White Wolf Valley, my father changed our marching route at the last minute to catch the enemy off guard. He decided to raid the Black Wolf tribe's left wing. No one knew that order except for a few lead generals. And the result? My voice turned hoarse, dripping with hatred and grief. The main force of the Black Wolf tribe was waiting for us. It was like a prearranged date. They opened their trap and waited for my father and brothers to walk right in. That day, you, Qianjun, were in charge of central communications. Tell me, besides you, who else could have sent that message out? I leaned into his face. Qianjun, how long are you going to keep acting? I've been wronged. I'm innocent. Qianjun collapsed to his knees instantly. He wailed at the top of his lungs, his voice filled with the grief of a man falsely accused. Young Marshal, please be fair. If I ever did anything to betray the prince or the Shao family, let heaven strike me down with lightning. Let me rot in the 18th level of hell. He sobbed as he spoke, snot and tears streaming down his face. He shook violently. He looked so innocent, so pitiful, that anyone watching would think he was a loyal soldier being framed by a villain. Down below, the anger of the tens of thousands of soldiers began to flicker. It was like a bucket of cold water had been dumped on their fire. Many of them felt a pang of sympathy. Whispers began to spread through the ranks like a rising tide. It doesn't seem right, one soldier muttered. General Qian has always treated us well. Remember last winter when supplies were low? He took off his own coat to give to a frostbitten recruit. Yeah, another added. 2 years ago, when my mother was sick and I had no money for medicine, he secretly gave me 5 taels of silver. I still owe him for that. Could the young marshal be wrong? The young marshal just took over. General Qian fought alongside the old prince for 20 years. How could a camp commander do something like this? If we kill a loyal man by mistake, the heart of the Northern Army will break. The seeds of doubt were growing fast. The soldiers looked at me with confusion and resentment. They couldn't connect this weeping, good old man with the traitor who killed their prince. Zhao Taizhan, the commander of the West Camp, was fuming. His weathered face turned purple, and the veins in his neck popped out like twisting worms. He thought I was just making a scene to establish authority by trashing the reputation of a veteran. Lin Yuan, do you actually have evidence? Zhao Taizhan roared, stepping forward. If you can't produce it, I won't stand for this. I watched Qianjun grow up. I trust his character. If he's a traitor, I'll pay for it with my own life. His voice was like a heavy bell, shaking the snow off the nearby structures. Li Hu, the commander of the East Camp, stepped out as well. He wasn't as loud, but his hand was resting on the hilt of his blade. Young Marshal, there is no room for jokes in the military, Li Hu said sternly. Everything needs proof. If you execute a commander without ironclad evidence, this won't end well. You'll lose the hearts of every soldier here. The other officers started nodding and murmuring in agreement. The atmosphere turned hostile. It felt like a mutiny was seconds away. On the side of the stage, Lu Hanyun's palms were slick with sweat. She stared at me, wondering what I was playing at. She knew that if I didn't produce something convincing right now, the Shao family was finished. The army's soul would collapse instantly. When Ruyu gripped her ledger, so hard her nails dug into her palms. She was praying for me to have a hidden card. Only Su Mei, standing in the shadows, watched with interest. Her cold eyes narrowed, a playful, icy curve touching her lips. The real show was just starting. General Zhao, calm down, I said. I remained eerily calm in the center of the storm. I acted like I couldn't hear the accusations or see the shifting loyalty of the troops. I even took a moment to slowly adjust the plates of my black iron armor. My composure was so absolute it made the generals hesitate. I turned around slowly, looking past the crowd toward the empty space behind me. I gave a slight nod. A smile spread across my face, the kind of smile a reaper gives when he's come to collect a soul. Third sister-in-law, I whispered. It's your turn. The moment the words left my mouth, a black figure appeared in the center of the platform like a phantom. There was no sound of footsteps. Even the air didn't seem to move. It was Su Mei. She was dressed in her tight, black night traveling gear, her body looking as lean and explosive as a leopard. 2 gleaming short blades were tucked into her waist. A black mask covered her face, leaving only her eyes, cold as winter stars, visible to the world. Su-mei, the master of the Wind and Rain Pavilion. Among the high-ranking officers of the Northern Army, she was a legend. No one knew where she came from. They only knew she ran the most mysterious and terrifying intelligence network in the prince's mansion. The moment Su-mei appeared, the air turned freezing. The theatrical wailing from the front lines stopped instantly. Qianzhen's body gave a violent, involuntary shudder. It was subtle, lasting only a fraction of a second, but I caught it. I had been watching him like a hawk. Su-mei stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade of ice. She walked right up to Qianzhen, looming over him. "I have a question for you," she said. "Every month, you put on a disguise and visit the drunken immortal tavern in the south of the city. 3 times a month, without fail. You always request a girl named Chun, but you never stay the night. You spend exactly 1 hour in that room, and then leave in a hurry. Am I right?" Qianzhen's body jerked as if he'd been hit by a bolt of lightning. He gritted his teeth, desperate to maintain his facade. I just go there to listen to music," he stammered. "I'm a man. What's wrong with a man going to a brothel to relax? Is that against the laws of the Great Xia military? Listen to music?" Su-mei's eyes were full of mockery, as if she were looking at a pathetic clown. "Does listening to music require a 100-tael tip every single time? Even the most famous courtesan in that tavern only costs 50 taels for a whole night. You, a simple listener, pay double that? Tell me, Qianzhen, were you there for the music, or did you have another purpose? Better yet, tell me where you got that kind of money. Your annual salary doesn't even come close. Did it just fall from the sky?" Every word Su-mei spoke was like a surgical scalpel, peeling back Qianzhen's skin and exposing the rot underneath. Cold sweat soaked through his inner robes, trickling down his spine. He looked like a man stripped naked and thrown into the snow, his darkest secrets dragged into the light of day. He opened his mouth to lie, but his brain was a total blank. "Can't speak?" Su-mei's voice suddenly turned sharp and piercing. "That's because you weren't there for music. You were meeting a contact from the Sihai Syndicate, the tavern's madam, Mother Huang. You were selling intelligence on my northern army. 3 times a month, you handed over our troop deployments, our grain reserves, and the movements of our generals. You traded our brother's blood for dirty silver." The crowd exploded. This accusation was a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the camp. Treason. That single word was enough to make Qianzhen die 10,000 deaths and be pinned to a pillar of shame for eternity. The training grounds turned into a boiling cauldron of rage. What? Treason? That backstabbing dog. No wonder the Black Wolf tribe always knew exactly where to hit us. I knew it. That ambush on the supply route last time. They were waiting for us. How could they have known our path? The soldiers' roars grew louder, a wave of fury ready to tear Qianzhen limb from limb. The men who had once accepted favors from him felt a physical sickness, wishing they could vomit up the silver he'd given them years ago. "I didn't. You're framing me," Qianzhen shrieked like a cornered animal. He snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot and his face twisted like a demon's. "Do you have proof? Do you have any evidence? Su-mei, don't think you can just slander a loyal officer because you lead the Wind and Rain Pavilion. Without proof, this is a setup." His voice was high-pitched and hysterical. It was the desperate struggle of a dying beast. "Evidence?" Su-mei looked at him with a flicker of pity, the kind of pity one feels for a man already dead. She reached into her robes and pulled out a plain, blue cloth ledger. It was old and frayed at the corners, but well-preserved. It even carried a faint, cheap scent of rouge and powder. "Qianzhen, do you recognize this?" she asked, holding it high. The moment Qianzhen saw that book, his pupils shrunk to pinpricks. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. His lips trembled violently. It was Mother Huang's secret ledger. The very book he had tried to destroy, the one the madam kept as a life-saving charm to keep him under her thumb. It was the record of every filthy transaction he had ever made with the Sihai Syndicate. He couldn't understand it. Mother Huang had sworn she'd hidden it in a place even ghosts couldn't find. How was it in the hands of the wind and rain pavilion? It was over. Everything was over. I see you recognize it, Sume said, her lips curling into a cold arc. She slowly flipped the yellowed pages, her long fingers tracing the lines. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the grounds like a death sentence. Year 119 of the Great Xia calendar, spring, received a gift from the former commander of the southern camp. Included, 1 copy of the Northern Army's spring training plan. Payment, 500 taels of silver. Year 119, summer, received a gift from the former commander. Included, the rotation schedule for the Yanmen Pass guards. Payment, 800 taels. Year 120, autumn, received a gift from the former commander. Included, a full inventory of the Northern Army's grain and fodder reserves. Payment, 800 taels. With every line Su Mei read, Qianzhen's body slumped further. The generals and soldiers below grew colder, their hearts turning to stone. Their every move had been laid bare. While they were bleeding and dying on the front lines, someone was selling their lives for a few hundred pieces of silver. Su Mei stopped suddenly. She looked up, her cold eyes locking onto Qianzhen. Her voice trembled slightly with suppressed rage. Year 120, winter, received a gift from the former commander. Included, a defensive map of the northern slopes of Yanmen Pass, and the Prince of Jinbei's secret plan for a surprise raid on the Black Wolf King's court. Payment, 10,000 taels of silver. Su Mei closed the ledger. The silence that followed was deathly. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Everyone was stunned by the weight of that number. 10,000 taels. Enough for a family to live in luxury for generations. And for that, Qianzhen had sold the soul of the Northern Army. Qianzhen, I said, my voice breaking the silence. I walked to the edge of the platform, looking down at the man who was now nothing more than a heap of trash on the ground. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. But my words hit like a sledgehammer. That defensive map was the route my father and my 8 brothers took for their final raid. Because of you, because of your 10,000 taels, the Black Wolf tribe set an ambush at White Wolf Valley 3 days in advance. Because of you, my family walked into a trap. 5,000 of our elite soldiers were led like lambs to the slaughter. Because of you, I couldn't even find their bodies. They were trampled into the mud by enemy horses. I leaned in closer, my eyes burning into his. Qianzhen, you piece of filth. When you look at the memorial tablets of our fallen brothers, how do you sleep at night? What do you have to say for yourself now? I roared my final words at him. My voice was thick with a bone-deep hatred and a fury so intense it felt like it could tear the sky apart. The entire training ground fell into a deathly silence. The truth hit the men like a physical blow, leaving them speechless. I watched as tears began to roll down the faces of those iron-willed soldiers. They finally understood. The defeat at Yanmen Pass wasn't because the Black Wolf tribe was too strong. It wasn't because our skills were lacking. It was because we had a rat in our own house. My father and brothers were murdered by one of their own. Qianzhen collapsed on the ground, his eyes losing focus. He started babbling like a lunatic. I didn't mean it, he whispered. I just wanted some money. I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't think the old prince would die. Don't kill me. Please, don't kill me. His voice grew weaker, fading into a pathetic, desperate whimper. Suddenly, a roar like a wild beast shattered the air. Zhao Tieshan's eyes turned blood red, the veins around them bulging until they nearly bled. His grief and rage exploded at once. Clang. He ripped his war blade from its sheath, the steel flashing coldly in the sun. I'll kill you, you son of a bitch. Zhao Taizhan charged like a maddened bull. He sprinted toward the platform, his blade held high, whistling through the air with the weight of a lifetime of loyalty. The old prince treated you like a brother. The young masters called you uncle. And you sold their lives for 10,000 taels? Are you even human? He screamed, his voice reaching the clouds. I'm cleaning house for the Shao family today. I'll take your head to offer to their spirits. The blade swung down with everything he had. But just as the edge was about to bite into Qianzhen's neck, a desperate, crazed howl erupted from the traitor's throat. Qianzhen's pale face flushed a sickly red. In a final burst of adrenaline, his body snapped upward like a coiled spring. He didn't try to block Zhao Tieshan's strike. He didn't even look at the other generals. He had a target. He lunged toward the side of the platform where my grandmother, the old madam, sat with my eighth sister-in-law, Xiaolinger. Linger was trembling, her face white with terror. This was his only chance. If he could grab one of them as a hostage, he might live. Qianzhen poured every ounce of his internal power into his legs. He moved like an arrow shot from a bow. No, like a cornered dog launching a suicide mission. He was fast. He moved so quickly, he left a faint blur in the air. 5 meters. 3 meters. 1 meter. His hands, twisted by greed and fear, reached out like claws. His jagged nails were inches away from Linger's shoulder. "Protect the old madam," Lu Hanyin and Zhonglian screamed. They drew their weapons, but they were too far away. Zhao Tieshan's blade hit nothing but air. He watched Qianzhen slip past him, and the color drained from his face. If anything happened to the women of the Xiao family, he would never be able to atone for it. Time seemed to slow down. Linger's eyes widened in horror as the distorted, monstrous face of the traitor closed in on her. She couldn't even scream. My grandmother instinctively pulled Linger behind her, raising her dragon-head staff. There was no fear in her eyes, only a grim resolve to die fighting. In that split second, I moved. I had been standing with my back to the chaos, acting as if I weren't even part of the world. I didn't even turn around. My body, clad in heavy black armor, simply leaned back at an impossible angle. Then, my right boot snapped out. It was like a sleeping dragon striking. It was so fast that the thousands of soldiers watching didn't even see what happened. All they saw was a dark shadow. Boom. A sickening, heavy thud echoed across the field. It didn't sound like a bone breaking. It sounded like a massive battering ram smashing into a rotting wooden plank. Qianzhen's momentum stopped dead half a foot away from Linger. The madness on his face froze, replaced by a look of total shock. He looked down slowly. My black boot was buried deep into his chest. It wasn't just a kick. His entire chest cavity had collapsed inward under the force, forming a horrific crater. The sound of every single one of his ribs shattering at once filled the air. Qianzhen opened his mouth to scream, but only a fountain of blood and bits of internal organs sprayed out. He was sent flying backward like a discarded ragdoll. He tumbled 7 or 8 meters through the air before slamming into the hard stone steps of the platform. The impact cracked the heavy green stone like a spiderweb. He lay in the center of the cracks, his body twisted into a grotesque shape. His limbs twitched uncontrollably. A wet, wheezing sound came from his throat as blood pooled around him, staining the stone red. He wasn't dead yet, but he was wishing he was. He could feel his organs, everything inside him, had been turned to mush by that single strike. He stared at my back, his eyes wide with disbelief. One kick, just one kick. He was a peak martial expert, and I hadn't even bothered to look at him while I broke him. The entire camp, all 53,200 men, went silent. They stood like statues, frozen in their shock. Not a single person moved. Zhao Taizhan stood frozen, his hand still gripping his blade. His eyes were wide as saucers, and his mouth hung open wide enough to fit a fist. He stared at Qianzhen twitching in a pool of blood, then back at me. I hadn't even turned around to look at my handiwork. Tieshan's entire worldview had been shattered by that single kick. He was wondering the same thing everyone else was. Was this really the sickly ninth young master? That power, that speed, that timing, it was impossible. Beside the platform, my sister-in-law Lu Hanyin gripped her sword hilt so hard her knuckles turned white. She was a master, a descendant of a great martial lineage. But she knew the truth. She couldn't have dodged that kick. She couldn't even see it. It wasn't martial arts anymore. It was pure, unreasonable violence. For the first time, the disdain in her eyes vanished. It was replaced by a bone-deep awe. The army below was even more stunned. Their brains had stopped working. From the moment Qianzhen tried to kill me to the moment he hit the stone steps, less than a second had passed. They only saw a traitor lunging at my back, and then they saw their young commander send him flying without even glancing over his shoulder. It was simple. It was brutal. It was terrifyingly strong. Then, the silence broke. One voice screamed out, "Commander is mighty." The dam burst. A wave of sound hit me like thunder, shaking the very walls of Yanmen Pass. Commander is mighty. Commander is invincible. If their earlier cheers were out of loyalty to the Shao name, these cheers were different. This was the raw, fanatical worship of absolute power. In the army, nothing conquers a man's heart faster than a display of overwhelming force. I finally turned around. The killing intent that had radiated from me vanished instantly. I walked over to Xiao Linger, who was still trembling from the shock. I reached out with the same hand that had just crushed a man's ribs and gently ruffled her hair. My voice was soft, almost a whisper. I asked her if she was scared. She stared at me for a long beat before bursting into tears and burying her face in my chest. I patted her back and looked at my grandmother. She looked back at me with complex, watery eyes. She saw the killer and she saw the grandson. Finally, she nodded, her face full of pride. She told me I had finally grown up. My warmth faded as I turned back to the traitor. Qianjun was still gasping in the dirt, clinging to a life that was already gone. He saw my black boots approaching and his eyes filled with terror. He started to beg. He offered me money. He promised me everything he owned if I just let him live. I looked down at him like he was an ant under my heel. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I lifted my right foot. Qianjun let out a final, panicked scream. My heavy iron boot came down with the force of a falling mountain. Crack. The sound of his chest caving in echoed across the grounds. The screaming stopped instantly. His eyes stayed open, staring at nothing, refusing to close even in death. I pulled my foot back as if I had just stepped on a cockroach. I turned to face the 53,000 men. The field went deathly silent. My voice rang out, cold and sharp, like a judgment from the depths of hell. I gave my first order. From this day forward, the Northern Army would have new rules. It didn't matter who you were or how high your rank was. If you betrayed the country, if you stole military funds, or if you ran from the battlefield, there would be no trial. I scanned the crowd, my eyes like daggers. You will be executed on the spot. The twisted corpse on the platform was still leaking blood and organ fragments. Qianjun, a high-ranking commander an hour ago, was now just a pile of ruined meat. The wind died down, and the soldiers forgot how to breathe. Zhao Tieshan's hand was shaking so hard his sword rattled against his armor. His face was pale. He finally understood. I wasn't a pampered noble or a sickly boy. I was a tiger that had crawled out of the underworld. Li Hu, another commander, backed away instinctively. He felt the aura of a man who had walked through mountains of corpses. This was the aura of a true king. My grandmother, the old Taijun, leaned on her staff. Tears streamed down her face. They weren't tears of grief, but of absolute relief. The Shao family finally had a successor who could hold up the sky. I ignored the stares and the fear. I looked at the mess at my feet one last time, then raised my eyes to the horizon. The reckoning had only just begun. He held the court's salary and the lives of 10,000 soldiers in his hands. Yet, he conspired with foreign enemies and sold out military intelligence. My voice wasn't loud, but it hit every soldier's heart like a heavy sledgehammer. I reminded them of the battle at White Wolf Valley. My father, the northern king Xiao Zhan, my 8 brothers, and the 50,000 soldiers who charged with them were all buried in a foreign land. All because of him. Because of the intelligence this piece of trash sold. Tell me, I shouted, does a man like this deserve to die? A brief silence followed. Then an explosion of fury erupted like a volcano. Kill him. Kill him. Slice him to pieces. The soldiers' eyes turned blood red. Their suppressed grief and rage were finally ignited. They pumped their fists, their roars shaking the very ground. If Qianjun were still alive, these 50,000 men would have torn him into fragments with their bare hands. I slowly raised my hand. The wave of noise died down instantly. I turned my cold gaze toward the front row of generals. They were trembling, silent as cicadas in winter. I told them plainly that money was a fine thing, but some money was stained with blood and shouldn't be touched. I said it casually, but to some, it sounded like a bolt of lightning. In a heartbeat, a dozen generals turned deathly pale. Cold sweat poured down their foreheads. Their legs shook so much they could barely stand. They thought they were invisible. They thought that with Qianjun dead, the evidence was gone. How could I possibly know? Inside my mind, the Yama tactical map activated. I ran a secondary biological scan, locking onto high-risk targets. Red data frames snapped onto those dozen generals. I could see their heart rates, their adrenaline levels, and their muscle tension. They were like fireflies in the dark. "I know some of you took money you shouldn't have," I said, my voice like a demon's whisper in their ears. "You said things you shouldn't have said. You did things you shouldn't have done." I paused, letting the fear sink in. "But my father and brothers just died. The Northern Army cannot afford more chaos. And I, Xiao Chun, am not a man who enjoys mindless slaughter." I shifted my tone, offering a hint of mercy. I gave them a choice. I told them they had 3 hours. Anyone who had dealt with the Four Seas chamber, taken black money, or leaked non-core intelligence had to go to the main tent. They had to register their confession with Lei Lai and hand over every cent of their ill-gotten wealth. I swore to the 30,000 soldiers of the Northern Army that if they stepped forward, I would let the past go. I would strip their ranks, but I would let them stay to atone for their crimes. If they performed well on the battlefield, they could even earn their positions back. The pale-faced generals felt a glimmer of hope. There was a way out. But my next words dropped them straight into an ice cellar. I told them they could also choose to gamble. They could bet that I wouldn't find them. I glanced at the woman in black standing nearby. "But let me be clear," I warned. "After 3 hours, if I see any of your names in my third sister-in-law, Su Mei's records from the Wind and Rain Pavilion, your end will be 100 times worse than Qian Jun's." I promised to put them through every military torture imaginable until they begged for death. Then, I would carve their crimes onto stone tablets so their descendants would carry the shame of a traitor for generations. I wasn't just killing them, I was destroying their souls. The choice was simple: a chance to live and serve, or an eternity of agony and infamy. Even a fool knew what to pick. I stopped looking at them and barked an order. "Lei Lai." "Present." Lei Lai dropped to one knee, his voice like a bronze bell. I ordered him to drag that dog Qianzhen's body outside the gates. I commanded him to prepare 5 horses. I wanted the traitor torn apart by chariots in front of the entire army. It was one of the most brutal ancient punishments, and a collective gasp went through the crowd. Lei Lai didn't hesitate. A bloodthirsty excitement sparked in his eyes. He grabbed Qianzhen by the ankles and dragged him down the platform like a dead dog, leaving a long, smearing trail of blood on the stone steps. The soldiers parted to let him through. They watched the mangled corpse with no sympathy, only pure satisfaction. They roared for revenge for the king and their fallen brothers. I turned back to the field. The silence returned. Everyone's eyes followed my every move. I didn't look at the kneeling Lei Lai or the terrified generals. My gaze moved past the crowd until it landed on the old general who was still standing there, his sword raised, frozen in shame. The atmosphere solidified. I spoke his name, my voice clear and steady. Zhao Taizhan. He was a man built like an iron tower, his face weathered by decades of war. Now, that face was whiter than snow. He still held the posture of someone about to strike, looking like a stone statue. The sword he had carried for 40 years now felt as heavy as a mountain, making his arms shake violently. His mind was screaming. Not long ago, he had roared that if Qianzhen was a mole, he would atone with his life. Those words were now a red-hot iron searing his soul. His face burned with shame. He had been blind. He had vouched for a traitor and nearly started a mutiny against his own commander. He had failed the old king, failed the Shao family, and failed the 50,000 brothers who died in the valley. Clang. The sound of his sword hitting the stone floor broke the silence. The strength left his massive body. Under the gaze of tens of thousands, the old general who had never bent his back on a battlefield fell to his knees before me. His knees hit the ground so hard the stone cracked like a spiderweb. "Young master," he rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper. He didn't offer a single excuse. He slowly drew a short suicide dagger from his waist and held it high with both hands, the tip pointed at his own chest. "I, Zhao Taizhan, was blind," he choked out. "I nearly caused a disaster. I have no face to live in this world. I beg the young master to grant me death. Take my head to uphold military law." The words felt like they were dragged through his teeth, dripping with blood and shame. Zhao Taizhan closed his eyes and bared his neck, ready for the blade. He looked like a man who had already accepted his fate. The air in the square turned ice cold. Every officer present felt a shiver run down their spine. "Young master, please reconsider." Li Hu, the commander of the East Camp, was the first to react. He threw himself onto his knees with a heavy thud, his voice desperate. General Zhao was just confused for a moment. His loyalty to the Shao family is known by heaven and earth. "Yes, young master. Have mercy," another officer cried out. There are 37 scars on General Zhao's body. Every single one was earned bleeding for the Shao army. He doesn't deserve death. In an instant, a dozen high-ranking generals followed Li Hu's lead, kneeling in a sea of armor. They knew the truth. Zhao Taizhan was a pillar of the Northern Army, one of the few veterans left who could actually hold this place together. Killing him would satisfy the law, but it would tear the heart out of the remaining troops. The tension reached a breaking point. Everyone held their breath, staring up at me as I stood on the command platform. My decision would change everything. In my mind, the Yanwang tactical map flickered to life. Cold data streamed across my vision. Target locked, Zhao Taizhan. Mental state, 95% shame, 90% regret. Loyalty, unchanged. The system ran the simulations instantly. Option 1, execution. Result, strict discipline, but the veterans would desert me. Option 2, immediate pardon. Result, kindness shown, but my authority would look like a joke. Option 3, win the heart, forge the soul. Result, 90% success rate. Total loyalty. The sharpest blade in my hand. I chose option 3. I stepped off the platform. My black combat boots hit the stone floor with a rhythmic thud. Asterisk tap, 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 asterisk. The sound seemed to sync up with the frantic heartbeats of the men around me. I didn't look at the officers begging for mercy. I walked straight to Zhao Taizhan. I didn't reach for the suicide dagger he held. Instead, I leaned down and picked up the heavy broadsword he had dropped earlier. The cold steel felt familiar in my hand, vibrating with a faint, blood-soaked energy. "Good sword," I muttered. I held the hilt out toward him. Zhao Taizhan felt the movement and opened his eyes, confused. He didn't see a killing blow. He saw his own weapon, the one marked by 40 years of war. "You want to die?" I asked, my voice flat and indifferent. "You think dying is loyalty? You think ending it all is atonement? Bullshit." I pointed a finger directly at his face, my voice rising to a sharp bark. "That is a coward's way out." Zhao Taizhan flinched as if I'd struck him. He looked up at me, stunned. In my eyes, he didn't see hatred or bloodlust. He saw a flame that looked like it could burn the world down. I looked down at his weathered face, the face of a man who had seen too much. My voice softened, but it carried a weight that shook the air. "Zhao Taizhan, you're old." Those words hit him like a sledgehammer. He looked at his white hair and his trembling hands. The sword he used to swing like a feather now felt like lead. A wave of bitter sorrow washed over him. But I wasn't finished. I stared at his old face, then at the sword in my hand. "But this blade, is it still sharp?" The question echoed like thunder in his mind. He looked down at the sword. It was covered in nicks and scratches from 1,000 battles. Each mark was a story of survival. The edge still caught the light, gleaming with a murderous chill. A spark of heat ignited in his chest, surging through his tired heart. He was old, yes. But as long as this blade was in his hand, he was still the commander of the West Camp. He was still the Iron Tiger of the Northern King. A roar erupted from deep in his throat, sounding more like a wounded beast than a man. His bloodshot eyes cleared. For a second, he looked 20 years younger. He surged to his feet, standing tall like an immovable mountain. He grabbed the hilt of his sword with both hands and thrust it toward the sky. "It is," he screamed, his voice drowning out the wind and snow. "Young master, this blade is still sharp. It can still kill. It can still drink blood." He spun around and dropped to one knee again, but this time, he slammed the sword into the ground before me. "I, Zhao Taizhan, swear to the heavens. I will fight for the young master for another 30 years. Wherever the blade points, I will go, even unto death." I looked at the awakened tiger before me and finally let a small, satisfied smile touch my lips. I had him. The sharpest, most stubborn blade in the Northern Army was finally mine. The silence broke. A roar of approval exploded from the ranks, louder than anything I'd heard yet. "Young master is mighty. The general is mighty. Fight! 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 The soul of the army had been reignited. I looked out over the crowd. From this moment on, my word was the only law that mattered. Subduing Zhao Taizhan was the most important move I could make. He was the oldest, most prestigious, and most stubborn piece of granite in the Northern Army. By breaking him in the most dominant way possible, I had effectively broken the will of every other officer. The remaining generals looked at the old man kneeling like a madman, then at me, standing there with cold indifference. Any last bit of doubt or hesitation, they had vanished into the wind. I didn't look at Zhao Taizhan again. I turned my back on him and faced the 50,000 soldiers standing in the training grounds. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Everyone knew what was coming. The traitors were dead. The veterans were tamed. Now came the rewards and the final decisions that would determine the fate of the 300,000 men in the Northern Army. Lei Lai, I called out. The man who had been kneeling the entire time snapped his head up. Present, his voice boomed like a bronze bell. As of today, you remain the commander of the North Camp. Lei Lai slammed his forehead against the stone floor with a dull thud. I obey. I am willing to die for the young master. I gave a slight nod and shifted my gaze. Li Hu. The commander of the East Camp tensed up and dropped to one knee immediately. Present. You remain the commander of the East Camp. Li Hu let out a long breath, a massive weight finally lifting off his chest. Thank you, young master. Finally, my eyes landed on Zhao Taizhan, who had just stood up. His body went rigid. He looked at me with a complicated expression, his lips trembling, but he eventually sank back down to one knee in silence. Zhao Taizhan, I said slowly. Present, he replied, his voice raspy and thick with shame. You remain the commander of the West Camp. Zhao Taizhan snapped his head up, his tiger-like eyes wide with disbelief. He had publicly defied me. He had nearly started a mutiny. Not only was I letting him live, but I wasn't even stripping him of his rank. Young master, I am guilty, he stammered, his face turning a deep shade of red. Your crime was being stupid, I said bluntly. But I saw your loyalty. The two cancel out, but don't let there be a next time. Use the blade in your hand to win back the dignity you lost today. It was a simple, harsh truth, but it hit him harder than any blow. Zhao Tieshan's shoulders shook, and his eyes turned red. He looked at me, a man younger than his own grandson, and felt a whirlwind of emotions. I obey, he roared. With the three commanders back in place, the heart of the army was stabilized. The tension in the air began to melt, turning into a spark of renewed energy. But I wasn't done yet. I was about to drop a bombshell. The commander of the South Camp was a traitor and has been executed. That position cannot remain empty. I paused, my eyes drifting to the side of the stage. There stood a woman in red armor, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. As of today, my eldest sister-in-law, Lu Hanyan, will take over as the commander of the South Camp. The entire training ground went deathly silent. 50,000 pairs of eyes turned toward the beautiful woman standing there. They were stunned, shocked, confused. Letting a woman lead a camp of tens of thousands of soldiers? It sounded like a bad joke. Even Li Hu and Lei Lai were frozen, looking at each other to see if they had misheard. Young master, you can't do this. The shout cracked through the silence like a thunderclap. It was Zhao Taizhan again. He had just sworn his life to me, but now he was back on his feet, his face purple with rage. He pointed at the stage, spit flying. Young master, I don't doubt the lady's courage, but since ancient times, there has never been a woman commander. This is a matter of national importance. You can't play around with the rules like this. Rules? I turned my head slowly. I stared at him with dark, cold eyes, a cruel smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Zhao Taizhan, tell me, what the hell are rules? A terrifying wave of killing intent exploded from my body. It felt like an invisible mountain slamming down on him. Zhao Taizhan gasped, his breath catching in his throat as if an invisible hand was squeezing his neck. He couldn't squeeze out another word. My father and brother died in battle. The imperial court withheld our supplies, and the Northern Army was left to starve. Were those the rules? Traitors ran the show while 50,000 loyal souls were buried in a foreign land. Were those the rules? I walked right up to Zhao Taizhan, speaking inches from his face. In this camp, in front of these 300,000 brothers, my word is the rule. My people are the rule. And my blade, that is the only rule that matters. I stared him down. Do you have a problem with that? Zhao Taizhan stumbled back, his face pale and dripping with sweat. He opened his mouth, but no argument came out. He knew the truth. In this corrupt world, the old rules were already dead. I turned back to the army, my voice echoing like thunder. I know what you're thinking. You think a woman isn't qualified to lead you. Fine. I'll tell you why she is. I pointed a finger at Lu Hanyan. 18 years ago, at Yinmen Pass, she rode alone into the enemy formation. She cut down 3 captains and over 100 enemy soldiers by herself. Did any of you kill more than her that day? The veterans in the crowd lowered their heads in shame. She is the eldest daughter-in-law of the Shao family. With my father and brother gone, she represents the dignity of my house. Her orders are my orders. Is that reason enough? In combat, she is second to no man. In status, she is the first lady of the Northern King's mansion. My gaze swept across the officers like a blade. Who else thinks she isn't qualified? No one spoke. Zhao Taizhan hung his head, looking like he wanted to vanish into the dirt. Li Hu and Lei Lai looked at each other, finally remembering that before she married into the Shao family, Lu Hanyin was a daughter of a legendary military house herself. Her spear had once been famous throughout the capital. Lu Hanyin, take your post. I barked. She stepped forward, her movements graceful but firm. She didn't look at the crowd. She simply knelt before me. I accept the command. I nodded, satisfied. The position of vice commander for the South Camp will be filled by my 4th sister-in-law, Zhongli Yin. She will assist in reorganizing the troops. Me. Zhongli Yin had been standing off to the side, happily watching the drama unfold. When she heard her name, she let out a celebratory yelp. She grabbed a massive gold-plated warhammer that was taller than she was and sprinted onto the stage. The ground literally shook when she dropped to one knee. Zhongli Yin accepts. Thank you, young master. Hee. If anyone doesn't listen, I'll just flatten them with my hammer. The generals' faces twitched. A cold, deadly commander and a girl with the strength of a monster. The South Camp was going to be more terrifying than a dragon's den. I looked out over the entire field one last time. One last thing. Every heart in the crowd skipped a beat, waiting for the final blow. I decided to take 500 of the absolute elite from each of the 4 main camps. 2,000 men in total. I would merge them into a single, new unit. This unit would not be restricted by the 4 camps, nor would they take orders from any other commander. They would answer to me, Shao Chun, and me alone. My voice carried a chilling authority that brooked no argument. I already had a name for them, the Hall of the Yama Kings. I told the crowd that I would be the one to personally train them. A collective gasp went up. This announcement was even more shocking than my appointment of Lu Hanyan. The faces of Zhao Taizhan, Li Hu, and Lei Lai twisted instantly. 500 elites from each camp. Those were their prized possessions, the backbone of their fighting strength. Taking 500 of them was like ripping out half of their souls. Young master, Zhao Taizhan blurted out, his face reddening with desperation. He looked like he was about to plead. I cut him off with a cold, sharp gaze. What? Am I, Shao Chun, no longer capable of commanding the soldiers of the Northern Army? That one sentence forced Zhao Taizhan to swallow his words. His face turned the color of a pig's liver, bloated with unspoken frustration. I didn't look at them again. Instead, I turned to the field of soldiers, facing those thousands of faces, some excited, some bewildered. I raised my voice, letting it roar with a magnetic, provocative energy. I know your generals are reluctant to let you go, I shouted. But let me tell you this. Being selected for the Hall of the Yama Kings will be the greatest honor of your lives. I will provide you with the best rations in the Northern Army. You will have meat at every single meal. I will forge the finest armor and weapons in the North for you. In 3 months, using the most rigorous and brutal training this world has ever seen, I will turn every one of you into a meat grinder on the battlefield, capable of taking on 100 men alone. I leaned forward, my eyes burning. I want the name Yama Kings to be the deepest, darkest nightmare in the hearts of the prairie barbarians. Tell me, do you want in? A brief silence followed. Then a roar like a mountain collapsing or a tsunami hitting the shore erupted from the ranks. Yes, we want in. We will die for the young master. The soldiers' blood was set on fire. The reluctance of their generals was instantly drowned out by this wave of fanatical heat. The commanders stood there with complex expressions, looking both pained and strangely expectant. I watched the boiling morale and let a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. I slowly raised one finger. I will give you the time it takes for one incense stick to burn, I said. I want the lists of 500 names from each camp delivered to me. I paused, my icy gaze sweeping across the faces of the three commanders. Of course, if the names aren't here when the incense runs out, I will personally go to your camps and borrow 1,000 men instead. My voice was quiet, but it hit Zhao Taizhan, Li Hu, and Lei Lai like a series of heavy hammer blows to the chest. 1,000 men. The blood drained from their faces instantly. They looked worse than when they had heard the front guard were traitors. Giving up 500 elites was like cutting out their hearts. Giving up 1,000 was like stabbing a hole straight through their torsos. These weren't raw recruits. These were veterans of 100 battles who could each stand against 10 men. They were the soul and framework of the camps. Zhao Tieshan's throat moved as he swallowed hard. His face, which had been red with excitement moments ago, was now a deep, bruised purple. He wanted to say something, to beg, to negotiate. But when his eyes met mine, calm and deep as an abyss, the words died in his throat. In my eyes, there was no room for negotiation. No jokes, only a final, absolute decision. He knew for a fact that if he dared to say no, I would truly lead my people into the West camp and handpick 1,000 of his best men. If that happened, he wouldn't just lose his soldiers, he would lose his dignity. The 50,000 soldiers on the field watched in dead silence. Even the wind and snow seemed to stop. The atmosphere was so thick it was hard to breathe. I didn't look at the three struggling commanders again. I turned my head slightly toward Lu Hanyan. Sister-in-law. I'm here, she replied instantly. She understood. She pulled a slender sandalwood box from her sleeve and walked to the incense burner at the front of the stage. With a flick of her internal energy, a spark ignited the tip of the incense. A thin trail of blue smoke rose straight up. One incense stick, I announced, my voice cold and clear. When it burns out, I want to see 2,000 men standing below this platform. This time, Zhao Taizhan didn't hesitate. He gritted his teeth, a look of tragic resolve crossing his weathered face. He let out a low growl to Li Hu and Lei Lai. Let's go. Pick the men. Damn it. Lei Lai cursed, stamping his foot. If we're cutting meat, let's just get it over with. He looked pained, but he was a man of action. Li Hu sighed, shaking his head with a bitter smile. A moment later, the three massive figures turned and sprinted toward their respective camps like three tigers being chased by a predator. Seeing them flee, the soldiers below erupted into a frenzy of chatter. God, it's actually happening. 2,000 elites. The Hall of the Yama Kings. That sounds badass. I wonder if I have a chance. Did you see General Zhao's face? He looked like his father just died. This is a massive blow to the camps. Shut up. If you were a commander and your 500 best fighters were taken, you'd be crying too. Excitement and longing mixed with a hint of pity for their commanders. My eighth sister-in-law, Xiao Linger, watched them go and tugged at my sleeve, looking worried. Ninth brother, will they resent you for this? I looked back, the harshness on my face softening instantly. I patted her hand and smiled. Resentment? Of course. It's like cutting meat off their own bodies. How could it not hurt? Then, her worry deepened. But they won't resent me for long, I said, my eyes flashing with confidence. Soon, they will only be waiting. They'll be waiting to see what kind of divine weapon I forge out of these 2,000 pieces of raw iron. When the Hall of the Yama Kings finally shows its fangs for the first time, they will only regret one thing, that they didn't grit their teeth and shove a few more of their men into the unit. Xiao Linger nodded, only half understanding. But the old matriarch, Xiao Qin, who had been sitting silently in her chair, suddenly had a sharp light flare in her cloudy eyes. She looked at me and realized I didn't just have the ruthlessness to kill. I had the wisdom to see into people's hearts. I was using both grace and power, the soft and the hard. This was the mark of a true great commander. "Grandmother, you should go back to the manor and rest," I said, walking to her side. "The wind is strong here." "I'm not going," she said, waving her hand. She thumped her dragon-headed cane against the ground. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. "These old bones aren't that fragile. I want to see this with my own eyes. I want to see how the pride of the Shao family reshapes the soul of the 30,000 Northern Army soldiers." I didn't push her. I simply took a fox fur cloak from a nearby guard and draped it gently over her shoulders. Time ticked by amidst the noise and anticipation. The incense in the sandalwood holder burned slowly through the wind and snow. Everyone's hearts rose into their throats as the stick shortened. When it was 1/3 gone, a heavy, rapid thudding of footsteps echoed from the west. Everyone turned. Zhao Taizhan was in the lead, marching toward the field with a line of men so long you couldn't see the end of it. His face was still that bruised purple color, but now it held a complex mix of both agony and fierce pride. 500 soldiers clad in iron armor marched behind Zhao Taizhan, their presence radiating a thick, murderous aura. They formed a neat square formation, standing in a silence that felt heavy with the scent of blood and death. These were men forged in the pits of hell. The ordinary soldiers nearby couldn't help but shrink back, giving them space. Zhao Taizhan walked to the base of the command platform and dropped to one knee. His voice boomed like a bronze bell. "Young master, 500 elites from the West camp reporting for duty." I let my gaze sweep across those 500 hardened faces. I activated my internal tactical system, scanning the group instantly. The data flooded my mind. 500 men, average age 32, average combat power 78, far above the 30 points of a standard soldier. Their loyalty to the Shao family sat at a solid 82, and they had survived an average of 47 battles each. They were qualified. These were the true elites who had crawled out from piles of corpses, the very foundation of an army. A faint smile touched my lips. I said, looking at Zhao Taizhan, "Good, the soldiers of the West camp are fine soldiers." That simple praise hit Zhao Taizhan like a warm current, soothing the sting of losing his best men. He snapped his head up, his old face flushing with an uncontrollable sense of pride. I thanked the young master for his praise. Soon after, Lihu from the East camp and Lei Lai from the North camp arrived with their own 500 elites. Before long, 1,500 battle-hardened warriors stood gathered below the platform. The three massive formations were airtight and deathly quiet. The collective aura of these 1,500 veterans surged toward the sky, seemingly tearing a hole through the falling snow. Everyone present, even the generals who had seen 1,000 deaths, felt their hearts skip a beat. They couldn't imagine what kind of terrifying power this unit would possess once they were fully polished into a single weapon. I stood high on the platform, looking down at this budding ace army, my eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The three generals knelt at the front. Though they still felt the pain of giving up their best troops, a spark of anticipation had begun to ignite in their hearts. The incense stick was half burned. Most people thought the day's drama was finally reaching its end. However, I slowly turned my head. My gaze fell upon my eldest sister-in-law, Lu Hanyan. She stood there in her red soft armor, trying her best to remain silent. The clamor on the field died down instantly. Every eye followed my gaze to the stunning widow of the prince of Jinbei's manor, the newly appointed commander of the South camp. Under the weight of tens of thousands of stares, I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly to every ear. "We are still short by 500 men." The words fell like a single snowflake onto the silent field, but they carried the weight of a mountain. The 1,500 elites already standing there were like pillars of iron, making the air feel frozen. Yet, everyone instinctively avoided looking toward the South camp's position. It was empty. Their previous commander, Qian Jun, had just been executed by dismemberment. The camp was leaderless, panicked, and broken, a muddy mess that no one wanted to touch. In the incense burner, the sandalwood stick representing the military order was nearing its end. The spark flickered, ready to die out at any moment. "Young master," Zhao Taizhan said, his voice strained as he stepped forward. "The South camp is in chaos after Qian Jun's execution. The soldiers' hearts are scattered. Perhaps We could spare a few more men from our 3 camps. He meant well. The south camp was a powder keg. If the new mistress went there and couldn't control the situation, it would be a humiliation for the entire Xiao family. Li Hu and Lei Lai nodded in agreement. They'd rather lose more men than see a riot break out. I didn't answer them. Instead, I looked directly at the beautiful woman in red armor beside me. Sister-in-law, do you need my help? I asked calmly. I can have Lei Lai take 1,000 soldiers to invite the men from the south camp for you. I put a heavy emphasis on the word invite. The cold thread in my voice was unmistakable. Lu Hanyan gave me a freezing look. Her phoenix-like eyes were filled with unyielding pride and stubbornness. The affairs of my south camp do not require the young master's concern, she said, her voice crisp and resonant. She didn't look at me again. She turned to the fiery figure standing by the drums, Zhongli Yin, who was leaning on her massive golden hammers. Fourth sister, let's go. Time to work. Finally, Zhongli Yan's eyes lit up. She hoisted a giant hammer onto her shoulder with a dull, bone-chilling thud. A bloodthirsty excitement danced on her face. My hands have been itching for a fight. Under 50,000 stunned gazes, the 2 women, one cold as ice, the other hot as fire, marched down the platform and headed straight for the south camp. The field erupted in whispers. Was the eldest mistress really going to pick the men herself? The south camp soldiers were all thugs who followed Qianzhen. They were arrogant and lawless. Would they really listen to a woman? Everyone expected a disaster. Zhao Taizhan was pacing and stomping his feet in anxiety, his face turning a deep shade of purple. I just stood there with my hands behind my back, watching the incense burn down. My eyes were deep pools, revealing nothing. Time ticked away. The atmosphere grew suffocating. The spark on the sandalwood stick grew weaker and weaker until the smoke was almost invisible. Just as the final glow was about to be swallowed by the wind and snow, thud. Thud, thud, a heavy, disorganized sound of footsteps echoed from the south. Everyone turned at once. Through the snow, 2 figures led the way, followed by a dark mass of soldiers marching toward the platform. It was Lu Hanyan and Zhongli Yan. As they drew closer, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Lu Hanyan's red armor was covered in clear fist marks and footprints. Her hair was messy, her beautiful face was smudged with dirt, and a trace of fresh blood stained the corner of her mouth. Beside her, Zhongli Yin looked thrilled, her face flushed red, and her golden hammers seemed to have bits of torn fabric stuck to them. Then there were the 500 soldiers behind them. If the other elites were like mountains of iron, these 500 were like rabid dogs fresh from a gladiator pit. Almost every single one of them was bruised and battered. They had black eyes, split lips, and torn clothes. They looked like a total mess. But their eyes were hauntingly consistent. They held a mix of intense pain, defiance, terror, and a sliver of newfound respect. Their gazes were locked onto the 2 women leading them. I scanned them immediately. 500 men. Average combat power, 75. Loyalty to the Xiao family, 68. I looked at my sister-in-law and allowed myself a small, knowing smile. She had done it. She had beaten them into submission. I scanned the stats of the new arrivals. Their morale was a mess. Anger was at 30%, resentment at 40%, and fear sat at 20%. Only 10% of them actually wanted to fight. They were a group of rebels who had been beaten into submission by sheer force. They had massive potential, but they were incredibly dangerous. Lei Lai stared at the battered soldiers, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the bruises and the blood and asked what had happened. Zhongli Yin puffed out her chest, her loud voice booming across the field so everyone could hear. She grinned and said that she and my eldest sister-in-law had gone to the southern camp and fought every single captain and commander one by one. She told the crowd that only those who could survive 10 moves against them were allowed to come. These 500 men were the only ones left standing. Silence fell over the entire square. Taishan and Li Hu looked like they had seen a ghost. Every soldier in the camp looked at those 2 women with a completely different expression now. Taking on an entire camp by themselves was beyond dominant. It was savage. Lu Hanyan ignored their shock. She walked to the front of the platform and knelt before me on one knee. Her voice was cold, though I caught a hint of exhaustion in it. She reported that the 500 men from the southern camp had arrived. As she spoke, the last wisp of smoke from the incense burner vanished. 2,000 elites were now assembled. I looked down at those 2,000 faces. Some were determined, others were defiant, but all of them were warriors. My blood began to boil. This was the foundation of my new era. I took a deep breath, and my voice rang out like a heavy bell across the training grounds. I told them that from this day forward, they only had one identity. All their past achievements and all their glory were officially reset to zero. A wave of commotion broke out. The veterans, handpicked from the best camps, looked insulted. A massive soldier, built like a bear with a jagged scar across his face, stepped forward. He roared that his name was Zhang Hu. He had served for 15 years and personally taken 83 heads from the grassland barbarians. He shouted that he wasn't some green recruit. His words echoed the frustration of the others. Countless angry eyes turned toward me on the platform. I looked at him, my expression flat. I asked him if he could pierce a target at 300 paces with a single arrow. Zhang Hu froze, then grumbled that he wasn't an archer. I nodded and asked if he could sprint 300 paces in 10 breaths. His face turned red. 300 paces usually took a significant amount of time. 10 breaths was practically flying. He choked on his words and admitted he couldn't do it. I didn't stop. I asked if he could march 100 miles through mountain trails in the winter wind while wearing 50 pounds of heavy armor. Then I asked if I gave him 10 brothers and they were surrounded by 100 enemies. Could he bring every single one of them out alive? Zhang Hu was completely silenced. He stood there with his mouth open, unable to say a word. He had fought in many brutal battles, but surviving a 10-to-1 encirclement was a miracle, let alone saving 10 others. I stepped forward, my gaze cutting through the 2,000 men like a blade. I raised my voice until it sounded like thunder. I told them they couldn't do it. None of them could. Their so-called bravery was just reckless impulse. Their military merits were just built on a pile of bodies. In my eyes, that was all garbage. I told them I didn't want thugs who only knew how to swing a blade. I wanted battlefield meat grinders who could complete missions in any desperate situation and fight 100 men alone. I told them to forget who they used to be. As of now, they were just useless trash, the lowest recruits in my Hall of the Yama. I tore into those 2,000 blood-hardened men until they couldn't look me in the eye. Zhang Hu's face went from red to white, and he finally lowered his head in shame. Their pride had been shattered by a few cold questions. I had them. I allowed a small smile to touch my lips and announced my next appointment. I called for my 6th sister-in-law, Hanyu. Among the crowd, a woman in black armor looked up. A long black bow was strapped to her back, and her eyes were sharp and lonely. I appointed her as the deputy commander of the Hall of the Yama to help me train these recruits. A spark of light flashed in Hanyu's usually calm eyes. She stepped forward and knelt. She accepted the command with a short, sharp acknowledgement. Finally, I scanned the entire field. My voice was filled with a mix of fanatical intensity and murderous intent. I ordered the entire army to assemble again at 5 the next morning. I told them they were beginning 3 months of hellish training. I promised them that in 3 months, they would become a nightmare that would make the entire northern border and the grasslands tremble at the mention of their name. I shouted, asking if they were brave enough to do it. After a brief, dead silence, a roar erupted like a mountain collapsing. They screamed their defiance and their readiness. The battle intent was so strong it felt like it could tear the clouds apart. I stood high on the platform and looked past the towering walls of Yanmen Pass toward the endless, vast grasslands. I whispered to my father and my 8 brothers to wait for me. In 3 months, their blood debt would be paid in full. Meanwhile, in the deepest, darkest room of the drunken immortal building, Mother Huang's face was twisted with rage. She stared at a loose brick in the corner and the empty hidden compartment behind it. Her manicured nails dug into the wood of the bed frame until it creaked. The ledger was gone. It contained every secret of her life, the corruption of the Yanmen Pass officials, and enough evidence to get everyone in the building executed. It was her leverage with the powerful figures in the Sihai Association. Without it, she was dead. She screamed, wondering who could have taken it. Then she remembered. A few days ago, I had caused a scene and specifically asked for Hongxiu. Mother Huang had been busy and had given Hong Xiu the keys to her room to fetch some tea. It had to be her. That little traitor. Mother Huang's eyes turned venomous, her face contorting with hatred. She turned toward the door and hissed for her men to grab Hong Xiu and take her to the basement. Half an hour later, in the damp, dark cellar of the drunken immortal building, the air was thick with the stench of rust and blood. Hong Xiu was shoved brutally into the room. She stumbled, nearly crashing to the floor. When she looked up and saw her surroundings, her face turned deathly pale. She had prepared herself for the worst, but this was a nightmare. The walls were made of thick gray brick, lined with every terrifying torture device imaginable. There were heavy iron chains, leather whips, and branding irons glowing black from use. I saw sharpened bamboo stakes and a tiger bench that radiated a sense of impending doom. This was the real back kitchen of the drunken immortal building. This was where Mother Huang dealt with girls who didn't listen or guests who knew too much. Mother Huang sat in the center of the room in a grand armchair. She held a cup of hot tea, blowing on it slowly. She didn't even look at Hong Xiu. "Where is the ledger?" she asked calmly. Hong Xiu took a deep breath, trying to bury her terror. Her voice remained steady. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mother." "What ledger?" Mother Huang sneered. She slammed her teacup onto the table. The sharp crack echoed through the silent cellar. "It seems you won't cry until you see your own coffin," she hissed. She stood up, walked over to Hong Xiu, and delivered a stinging slap. Hong Xiu's head snapped to the side. 5 red finger marks bloomed on her pale cheek, and a thin trail of blood leaked from the corner of her mouth. "I'll ask you one more time." Mother Huang's voice was ice. "Where is the ledger?" Hong Xiu spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva. Her eyes stayed defiant. "I don't know." "Good. Very good." Mother Huang laughed, though her eyes were full of rage. "You think your bones are tough? Let's see if they're tougher than my whip." She signaled to 2 massive thugs standing nearby. "Hang her up. Start the punishment." The thugs moved in with cruel grins. They grabbed Hong Xiu's arms and wrapped cold iron chains around her slender wrists. With a rhythmic clatter, they hauled her up until her feet left the ground. She hung there, suspended in a humiliating X shape. Mother Huang pulled a leather whip soaked in brine off the wall. She snapped it in the air. "Crack. Will you talk?" Hong Xiu responded by closing her eyes and biting her lip until it turned white. "You're asking for death." Mother Huang screamed. She swung her arm back and lashed out. The whip tore through the air and landed squarely on Hong Xiu's back. Hong Xiu let out a muffled groan. Her body jerked violently. Her thin dress shredded instantly, revealing a horrific red welt. The salt water stung the open wound like 1,000 needles. She gritted her teeth. She wouldn't beg. If she spoke, she was dead anyway. More importantly, the man who had given her a glimmer of hope, the man she had given the ledger to, would be dragged down with her. Asterisk crack. 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 Asterisk. The whip fell again and again like a strikes from a venomous snake. Soon, Hong Xiu's clothes were nothing but rags. Her white skin was covered in a crisscross of bloody gashes. She looked like she had been dipped in red paint. Blood flowed down her legs, pooling on the floor beneath her toes. Her consciousness started to fade. Memories flashed through her mind. 3 years ago, her family had been destroyed, and she was sold into this living hell. Mother Huang had forced her to learn how to smile, how to flirt, and how to extract bloody secrets from drunken men. Until that day, the day a young nobleman in white kicked open her door. He had a playboy's face, but his eyes held a light deeper than any abyss. He told her he would save her. Those eyes were the only light she had ever seen in this darkness. She had to hold on to that light, even if it meant being crushed to pieces. Talk or not, Mother Huang was panting now. She looked at Hong Xiu, who hung there like a broken rag doll. There was no mercy in her heart. Hong Xiu slowly opened her eyes. The blood made her vision blurry, but her voice was crystal clear. "I don't. No. You." Mother Huang was completely livid. She threw down the whip and grabbed a glowing red branding iron from the brazier. The air sizzled and warped from the heat. Mother Huang grinned maniacally as she brought the iron close to Hong Xiu's face. A face that was still beautiful despite the blood. "You little bitch. I hate this face of yours the most. Since you want to do this the hard way, I'll destroy it." Last chance. Where's the ledger? The heat was stifling. Hong Xiu could smell her own hair beginning to singe. She closed her eyes. 2 tears escaped and rolled down her cheeks. It wasn't fear. It was relief. Master Xiao, I did my best, she thought. She snapped her eyes open. They were incredibly bright. With her last bit of strength, she spoke each word slowly. I gave it to someone who can take your pathetic lives. Your end is coming. You bitch. You're dying, and you still talk back. Mother Huang screamed. She raised the branding iron, aiming it straight for Hong Xiu's forehead. At that exact moment, a deafening explosion rocked the room. The iron door, 3 inches thick and weighing 1,000 pounds, was hit as if by a prehistoric beast. With a screech of twisting metal, the entire door ripped out of its frame. It flew inward like a meteor, trailing debris and dust. Boom! It slammed into the floor, crushing the stone and sending spiderweb cracks across the room. The entire cellar shook. Mother Huang and the 2 thugs stood frozen, their souls nearly leaving their bodies from the shock. Through the settling dust of the doorway, a tall, slender figure walked in against the light. He wore a snow-white robe that looked completely out of place in this bloody, dark hole. His handsome face was expressionless. His dark eyes were as calm as a deep well, but they carried a coldness that could freeze a soul. It was me, Xiao Chun. Young Master Xiao. The branding iron clattered out of Mother Huang's hand, sparking on the floor. Her face, previously twisted with rage, was now a mask of pure terror. How was I here? How did I find this place? And more importantly, how did I open that door? Did I use a battering ram? Stop him! Mother Huang shrieked after a moment of stunned silence. She pointed at me, barking orders at her 2 thugs. These were professional killers she paid a fortune to maintain, men who had ended many lives for the drunken immortal building. The 2 men growled, drawing short blades from their waists. They lunged at me from both sides. They were coordinated, their blades crossing to block any possible escape route. I didn't even look at them. My eyes never left Hong Xiu, who hung there, covered in blood. I looked at Hong Xiu's frail, broken body. When my eyes fell on the deep, jagged whip marks that cut straight to her bone, the calm in my heart shattered. A murderous intent, sharper than any blade, flared within me. The temperature in the secret room seemed to drop to sub-zero in an instant. From my left, one of the thugs lunged. His blade was inches from my neck, a cruel, confident smirk plastered on his face. But in the next heartbeat, his smile froze. I didn't even bother to dodge. I simply raised my right foot. My movement was faster than the human I could track. Crack! The sound of his ribcage shattering was sickeningly loud in the confined space. His forward momentum stopped instantly. His chest caved inward at a grotesque angle. He sprayed a fountain of blood, but he was flying backwards so fast he actually outran his own mist of gore. Thud! He hit the far wall like a heavy sack of trash, slid to the floor, twitched twice, and went silent. 1 kick. That was all it took. The other thug, attacking from the right, felt his heart fail him. Seeing his partner erased in a second killed his courage. He tried to skid to a halt and bolt for the door, but the moment he turned, his neck tightened. My hand clamped around his throat like a steel vise. I was behind him before he could even blink. I lifted his 200-pound frame off the ground as easily as picking up a stray kitten. Keep your eyes open in your next life, I whispered. My voice was like ice. Snap! The sound of his neck snapping was the final note in that short symphony of death. I let go, and his limp body crumpled into the dust. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds. 2 of the deadliest mercenaries in the Yinmen Pass underworld were gone. The room fell into a tomb-like silence. Mother Huang collapsed, her body shaking like a leaf. A dark, foul-smelling puddle began to spread from beneath her expensive silk skirt. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended words. To her, I wasn't a man anymore. I was a reaper who had crawled out of the deepest pit of hell. Monster, you're a monster, she whimpered. I ignored her. I walked to the wall where Hong Xiu hung by her wrists, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. I reached up and grabbed the iron chains. They were as thick as a man's thumb, designed to hold a straining ox. I flexed my arms, the muscles bulging and veins popping like a cage of iron when he exerts his superhuman strength. Screech. With a deafening groan of protesting metal, I ripped the chains apart with pure, raw strength. The broken links clattered to the floor. I caught Hong Xiu before she hit the ground, gently pulling her blood-soaked body into my arms. Her consciousness was fading, but she felt the warmth of a solid chest and caught the faint, comforting scent of a man. She struggled to open her heavy eyelids. Through the blur, she saw the face she thought she'd never see again. Young Master Xiao. Her voice was a mere thread of sound. "Don't speak," I said, my voice softer than it had ever been. "I'm here." I stripped off my spotless white robe and wrapped it tightly around her scarred, shivering body, shielding her from the filth and cold of the cellar. "I promised I'd pull you out of this mud," I whispered into her ear. "I keep my promises." She gave a tiny shiver, finally relaxed, and surrendered to unconsciousness. Once she was safe, I turned back. The tenderness vanished. In its place was a killing intent that could freeze the sun. I walked over to Mother Huang and looked down at her like she was an ant. I pulled a thick ledger from my robe and tossed it at her feet. It was the book Su Mei had brought to the training grounds, the one stained with Qianzhen's blood. "Qianzhen, commander of the Yuanin camp," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "An hour ago, in front of 53,000 soldiers, he was drawn and quartered. There isn't enough of him left to bury." Mother Huang's pupils shrank to pinpricks. Her blood turned to lead. "Qianzhen was dead? Executed?" "This ledger is the proof of his treason," I said, nudging the book with my boot. "And the other ledger, the one detailing every cent of dirty money flowing through the drunken immortal building, is in the hidden compartment in your room." Hong Xiu gave me the key. The last of Mother Huang's hope shattered. I knew everything. "Ninth young master, mercy. Please, mercy." She scrambled toward me like a maggot, trying to grab my legs. I kicked her away in disgust. "I'm giving you two choices," I said, crouching down to grab her chin, forcing her to look me in the eye. "First, you stay the manager of this building. Everything continues as usual, but you have a new owner. From today, this place belongs to my third sister-in-law's Wind and Rain Pavilion. You work for me." A flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. "Second," I continued, my lips curling into a cruel smile, "I pack you up along with that ledger and send you both to the study of Governor Zhao Defeng. Do you think he'll protect you? Or do you think he'll kill you himself to make sure you never talk?" The color drained from her face. She knew Zhao Defeng. He was a shark. He wouldn't just kill her. He'd make her death look like a mercy compared to what I'd do. This wasn't a choice. It was a lifeline. "I choose the first. I choose the first," she shrieked, slamming her forehead against the stone floor until it bled. "I will be your dog, young master. I'll do anything." "Good." I stood up and wiped my fingers with a handkerchief as if I'd touched something rotting. I looked toward the door. Lei Lai. Present. Lei Lai, a man built like a tower of iron, stepped into the room followed by a squad of grim-faced soldiers. They had been waiting in the shadows the whole time. "Leave 50 men," I ordered. "Have them change into plain clothes and take control of the building. From this moment on, not even a fly leaves this place. Anyone who saw what they shouldn't have or knows what they shouldn't know, handle them." "Understood," Lei Lai growled, a hint of dark excitement in his eyes. Hearing the words, "handle them," Mother Huang's nerves finally snapped. Her eyes rolled back, and she fainted on the spot. I didn't give her a second look. I adjusted my grip on Hong Xiu, lifting her in a steady carry. I walked out of that dark, suffocating hole, through the silent corridors, and back into the main hall of the drunken immortal building. The lights were still bright, but the room was deathly quiet. Every guest, every girl, and every servant was huddled in the corners, staring at the floor while soldiers held blades to their throats. I didn't look at a single one of them. I walked straight through the crowd, carrying the girl I had saved, and stepped out into the night. The freezing wind bit at my face, carrying flakes of snow that settled on my skin and Hong Xiu's pale cheeks. In my arms, she finally relaxed. I felt like a fortress to her, shielding her from the cold, the filth, and the fear. She breathed in the scent of my robes and listened to the steady thrum of my heart. To her, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Just before she drifted into a deep sleep, a small, satisfied smile touched her lips. She had gambled her life on me. She had won. We reached the prince's manor shortly after. In a quiet room in the back, the air was thick with the smell of medicine. My second sister-in-law, Shin Jingshu, stood over Hong Xiu. The girl was wrapped in gauze like a cocoon, still unconscious. Jingshu's brow was furrowed tight. She was a military doctor who had seen the worst of the battlefield, but even she winced as she cleaned the wounds. The cuts were deep. Some went straight to the bone. They were animals, Jingshu whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of horror and relief. Another half hour, and she would have been beyond saving. I had already changed out of my blood-stained silk robes. I now wore simple black tactical gear. I didn't say much. I just gave a small nod. My face was a mask of stone. Little brother, Jingshu started, but she trailed off. She looked at me like I was a stranger. One moment, I had been carrying that girl as if she were a fragile treasure, my eyes cold enough to freeze bone. The next, I was back to being a silent observer, detached from everything. She's in your hands now, I told her, cutting off her questions. Use the best medicine, make her whole again. If you need anything, go to the treasury and tell Mother Wu. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked out of the room. I knew the atmosphere in the manor was changing. The storm was finally here. I crossed the winding corridors and passed a jagged rock garden until I reached a remote courtyard. The gates were shut tight. Two men dressed as servants stood guard, but their breathing was too steady and their stances were too firm. They weren't servants. They saw me and pushed the heavy wooden doors open without a word. Behind the doors lay a narrow stone staircase spiraling down into the dark. This was the domain of my third sister-in-law, Sume. This was the heart of the manor's secrets, the wind and rain building. I descended 100 steps until the space opened up. It was a massive underground chamber, lit by glowing pearls embedded in the walls. It wasn't grand. It was cold and lethal. Maps and scrolls covered the walls alongside rows of wicked weapons. I saw everything from razor-sharp hidden swords to needles tipped with blue poison. In the center sat a massive sandalwood sandbox. It was a perfect miniature of the entire northern frontier. A woman in tight black clothes stood there, her face masked. Sume. She didn't turn around when she heard my footsteps. You brought her back? She asked. Her voice was like ice. I did, I said, walking up to the map. She's shredded to the bone, but she'll live. Sume looked at me for a long moment. She could feel the pressure building inside me. It was like a volcano seconds away from an eruption. What do you plan to do? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. I reached out and picked up a small yellow flag from the sandbox. It represented the drunken, immortal building. It felt light in my hand, but it carried the weight of Hong Xiu's scars and the blood of my fallen family. My hand trembled with a sudden, sharp rage. I slammed the flag back into the sandbox so hard the wooden pole buried itself deep into the base. Sahaitong has 37 outposts in the north, right? I asked. My voice was low. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a hurricane. Correct, Sume said. She pointed to the markers. They weren't just brothels. They were tea houses, pawn shops, and grain stores. They were the veins of the north, all pumping information back to the Prime Minister, Qin Song. She pointed to a shop in Yinmen Pass that fenced stolen military gear. She pointed to an inn that gathered gossip from traveling officials. Finally, she hit the most dangerous one, Wanjia grain. This is the deadliest one, she said, her voice dripping with hate. They are the biggest grain merchants here. They control the food. Even our army has to buy from them. They give us rotting grain at double the price and line their pockets while our soldiers starve. Every location she named was a fresh wound. I listened until she was finished. My shadow stretched long across the map. Pull them out, I said. The room went silent. Sume's hand froze. She looked up, her usually calm eyes wide with shock. All of them, she whispered. Xiaochen, do you realize what you're saying? Do you know what this means? I turned to face her. My eyes were like twin pits of freezing water. I know exactly what it means, I said. It means I'm tearing the mask off. It means war with the Ministry of Revenue. And it means war with Qin Song. Sume spoke each word slowly, her voice carrying a sharp edge of desperation she didn't even seem to notice. She warned me that the imperial court's pressure would come down on us like a collapsing mountain. A single imperial decree, a few letters of impeachment, or even a direct order to mobilize the army against us would be the end. She asked me if I had truly considered the consequences. I let out a cold laugh. It was a sound filled with mockery and a freezing intent to kill. I looked at my third sister-in-law and asked her if she really thought they were leaving us a way out. I stepped toward her, the terrifying aura I had forged during those 49 days of hell rolling off me like physical stone. Sume was a top-tier assassin, a woman who lived in the shadows and dealt in death, yet she instinctively flinched and took a half-step back. I reminded her that they had already murdered my father. They had murdered my 8 brothers. I asked her if she expected me to kneel on the ground and wag my tail, begging for my life. My voice grew colder with every word, hitting her like shards of ice. Their intelligence network had crawled into the vital organs of our northern army like a venomous snake, leading to the slaughter of 50,000 elites. I refused to pretend I didn't see it. I wouldn't let them keep doing as they pleased under my nose until we were all dead and buried. I closed the distance between us, my footsteps heavy against the floor, matching the frantic beat of her heart. I told her one thing. From now on, I was done enduring. The air in the underground room felt like it had frozen solid. Sume stared at me through her veil, her eyes searching mine as if trying to see through my soul. My words were quiet, but they hit her with the weight of a war hammer. To say we wouldn't endure was easy, but the reality behind those words was a sea of blood. It meant making an enemy of the entire imperial court. One wrong move, and the Prince of the North's mansion would be wiped from existence. I ignored her shock and turned back to the massive sandbox map. My fingers traced the territory as if I were inspecting my own kingdom. I looked at the little yellow flags representing the Sehaitong outposts. From the Jubao Pavilion inside Yanmen Pass to the grain stores and pawnshops in the surrounding counties, there were 36 flags in total. They were like 36 poisonous fangs sunk deep into the flesh of the North. My father's and brother's blood could not be shed in vain. My voice remained calm, but Sume could sense the volcanic rage simmering just beneath the surface. I raised my hand and slammed my index finger down on the furthest outpost on the map. I gave her 3 days. Within 3 days, I wanted every single yellow flag on that sandbox to disappear. I wanted every manager, every accountant, and every core guard in those 36 locations dead. I wanted nothing left alive, not even the dogs or chickens. Sume's mind went blank. Her head buzzed with the sheer insanity of the command. 3 days to wipe out 36 fortified outposts without leaving a soul alive wasn't just bold, it was a pipe dream. Her voice lost its usual composure and turned sharp. She told me that even if she used every core hidden guard and every secret agent in the Windrain building, she had fewer than 200 people. Every Sehaitong outpost was a mini fortress, protected by known guards and unknown mercenaries. Places like the Zuatian Inn and Jubao Pavilion were as heavily guarded as military outposts. Trying to hit 36 of them at once with 200 people wasn't a mission, it was a suicide run. I turned back to her slowly. The light from the luminous pearls reflected off my eyes like polished black glass. I asked her who told her she was going alone. She looked confused, so I laid it out for her. I told her I would pull 500 battle-hardened elites from Lei Lai's north camp and another 500 from Zhao Tieshan's west camp. 1,000 fully armed veteran soldiers would be at her disposal. Sume was truly horrified now. She lunged forward and grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin from the sheer intensity of her grip. She hissed that those were soldiers of the Northern Army, the border defense of Great Xia, not the Shao family's private servants. Using the military to interfere with local merchant guilds was treason. It was the highest form of rebellion. She told me that if the news reached the capital, the emperor wouldn't even need an excuse to execute us all. She thought her words would bring me to my senses. Instead, all she saw was a freezing, mocking sneer on my face. I grabbed her wrist in return, my grip so tight she winced. I told her that the moment I ordered the execution of the frontline general at the drill grounds, there was no turning back. I asked her if she really thought that if we tucked our tails now, the Prime Minister or the Emperor would spare us. I told her not to be naive. My voice turned sharp, each word like a needle dipped in ice. I told her they would only see us as weak and push us harder toward our graves. I shoved her hand away and stepped into her space, my killing intent making it hard for her to breathe. My father spent his life guarding the gates of this country, and what did he get? His bones were left to rot in White Wolf Valley. My 8 brothers gave every drop of their blood, and what did they get? Their rations were stolen, and their 300,000 soldiers were left to starve. Now, they wanted to strip our command and put a blade to our throats. I slammed my fist into the sandalwood edge of the sandbox. The wood cracked under my strength, leaving a deep imprint of my knuckles. If they wouldn't give us a way to live, I would carve a path out with my own hands. My eyes burned with a manic fire. I wanted the Prime Minister and all those parasites in the capital to know exactly what happened when they provoked the house of the Northern Prince. They would pay a price in blood. Even if I had to tear a hole in the heavens itself, I would make them bleed. Sume stared at me, completely stunned. She looked at me like I was a madman, seeing the absolute resolve in my eyes, a look that said I was willing to destroy everything to get what I wanted. She realized then that I wasn't asking for her opinion. I was giving an order. She forced herself to calm down. Her voice returned to its usual icy tone, but a small flicker of fire danced in her eyes. She told me she would go along with my madness this once, but she needed time. She needed to integrate intelligence, plan the routes, and coordinate personnel. She asked for at least 3 days. One day, I interrupted without hesitation. Impossible, Sume snapped back. I walked over to the sandbox and pointed at the location of Yinmen Pass. I told her that as an intelligence officer, she should understand timing better than anyone. After the chaos I caused at the North Camp, executing a general by dismemberment and announcing a purge of traitors, the spies in the city weren't blind or deaf. I told her the news would reach every stronghold leader within 12 hours. They wouldn't wait for us. They would move the ledgers, destroy evidence, gather their men, and set traps. If we waited 3 days, we would find nothing but empty buildings and lethal ambushes. Speed is everything in war, I said, my eyes cold and precise. We had to strike while they were still reeling from the shock, before they could react. We needed to kill them with a single, lightning-fast blow. Sume fell silent. She knew I was right. Against absolute speed, all schemes and plots become useless. She nodded, accepting the near-impossible task. Good. I turned and headed toward the stone steps. I had the answer I needed. But as I reached the exit, I stopped. I didn't look back, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop as I spoke. One last thing, I said. Sume looked at my back. I told her to have her hidden agents in the Wind and Rain Pavilion watch every general in the army. I wanted eyes on anyone who looked nervous at the drill grounds, or anyone who had suddenly started spending large amounts of money. My voice turned flat and terrifying. I told her that if anyone tried to send a message outside or made an excuse to leave the camp, she didn't need to ask me or anyone else for permission. Kill them on the spot, I ordered. Hang their bodies on the camp gate for everyone to see. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, a desolate valley had been transformed into a terrifying training ground. This was now the exclusive domain of the Yama Palace. 2,000 elites drawn from the 4 major camps stood straight as pines in the biting wind. They looked proud, thinking this hellish training would just be a bit more work than usual. They were veterans who had crawled out of piles of corpses. They thought they had seen it all. But when I appeared, the atmosphere shifted. I wasn't wearing my majestic black iron armor. I wore a thin black training suit, just like them. Yet the murderous aura radiating from my bones was even heavier than when I was fully armed. Behind me stood my 6th sister-in-law, Lu Hanyan. She carried her longbow, her face expressionless and her eyes cold as ice, looking at the soldiers as if they were livestock headed for slaughter. From today on, forget who you used to be, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the wind like a frozen blade. I told them they no longer had names or pasts. They only had the numbers on their chests and the duty to obey. I scanned the crowd, my gaze like a knife's edge. Everyone, take off your shirts. The soldiers froze. It was midwinter, before dawn, and the temperature was at least 20 degrees below zero. Taking off their shirts was a death sentence. A commotion broke out. Don't you understand my words? I narrowed my eyes. Or are you afraid? Zhang Hu, the stubborn veteran from the day before, stepped forward again. He shouted that they weren't afraid, but that they would freeze to death. He argued that they were there to train, not to die. He had fought for 15 years and taken 83 heads. He wasn't about to let a young brat kill him with a reckless order. Others began to mutter in agreement, asking me to reconsider. I didn't get angry. Instead, I smiled, a thin, haunting smile that made Zhang Hu's heart skip a beat. Without a word, I began to strip off my own black tunic. Soon, my upper body was exposed to the freezing wind. My physique was powerful, built like cast steel, but it was covered in a terrifying web of scars. Old and new wounds overlapped, silently telling the story of the hell I had endured. The soldiers were speechless. They couldn't believe that the sickly, frail man from a month ago now possessed such a formidable body. Some whispered that I had more scars than they did. I ignored their shock and walked over to a row of large wooden tubs. They were filled with ice water, with shards of ice still floating on the surface. Under the weak morning light, the water shimmered with a lethal chill. Under the gaze of 2,000 pairs of eyes, I took a deep breath and hoisted a tub. I poured the entire thing over my head. The ice water crashed down, instantly wrapping me in a bone-shredding cold. It felt like 1,000 frozen needles were being driven directly into my marrow. The ice water felt like 1,000 tiny knives cutting into my skin. My body gave a violent shudder. I felt my skin turn beet red, then my lips shifted to a deep shade of purple. Veins bulged across my forehead like thick cords. The hot steam from my breath coiled in the freezing air like 2 white dragons, but I didn't make a sound. I stood there, straight as a spear, perfectly still. 1 breath, 5 breaths, 10 breaths. For 10 full seconds, I just stood there. I let the ice water cascade down my body, watching it freeze into a thin layer of frost on the dirt at my feet. Finally, I turned to face the soldiers. They looked completely stunned. I grinned at them, baring my teeth, the white mist still curling from my nose. "Do you still think it's cold?" I asked. Silence. The entire field was deathly quiet. Zhang Hu stared at me, a man standing shirtless, covered in frost, yet unmoving. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He looked like he'd been slapped across the face. He tried to speak, but his throat was tight. To him, I wasn't a man anymore. I was a monster. "Tell me," I shouted, my voice cracking like thunder across the camp. "On the battlefield, will the enemy spare you because it's cold? Will they show mercy because you aren't dressed warmly enough? When you're buried in the snow for 3 days waiting for the perfect kill, will you give up because you're shivering? When you're wading through a frozen river to raid a camp, will you retreat because of a little ice?" Every word I spoke hit them like a hammer. I told them that a real warrior adapts to anything. Extreme cold, blistering heat, hunger, thirst, these were just the basics. If they couldn't handle this, they weren't the elite of the North Army. They weren't worthy of my Yin Wang Hall. I walked toward Zhang Hu. With every step I took, the killing intent radiating from my body grew heavier. I stopped right in front of him, looking up at the man who stood half a head taller than me. "Zhang Hu," I said coldly, "you said you've taken 83 heads, right?" He gritted his teeth, his pride forcing him to answer. "Yes." "Good," I nodded. "Now tell me, how many of those were one-on-one? How many did you kill while you were wounded, starving, and out of supplies? How many did you take while you were alone, deep behind enemy lines with no hope of rescue?" Zhang Hu's face went pale. My words were like scalpels, cutting straight to his heart. He had killed those men on a traditional battlefield, surrounded by his brothers, fighting with the advantage. He started to sweat despite the cold. His lips trembled, but he couldn't find an answer. "I'm not mocking your service," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "You're a good soldier. You're a brave man. But—" I paused, my eyes turning back to ice. "You aren't strong enough. None of you are. You think you're elites, but to me, you're just slightly stronger than average peasants. A true elite is a war machine that can kill 10, 100, even 1,000 men in any environment. And I am going to turn you into those machines." I spun around to face the entire crowd. My voice echoed off the valley walls. "I'll ask one more time. Take off your shirts. Any problems?" "No." 2,000 men roared back in unison. The sound was deafening. Without another word, every single one of them, including Zhang Hu, stripped off their tunics. They revealed bodies covered in their own scars, a testament to their years of service. Good, I said, pointing to the wooden tubs. Now, every man pours a bucket over his head. Then, you run 20 laps around this valley. If you stop, or if you collapse, pack your bags and get out. I don't keep trash. The soldiers gasped. 1 lap was at least 3 miles. 20 laps was 60 miles. This wasn't training, it was a death march. But nobody complained. They watched as I took the lead, charging out into the mist first. Ice was still clinging to my skin, and steam trailed behind me like a ghost, but my pace was steady and powerful. Zhang Hu was the first to react. He let out a primal scream, hoisted a tub of ice water, and drenched himself. He gasped as his muscles seized from the shock, his teeth chattering violently. But he looked at my back, remembered my unwavering stance, and threw the bucket aside. I won't lose, he roared, charging after me. If the young master can do it, so can I. One by one, the soldiers followed. They doused themselves in the freezing water, letting out pained, excited howls before sprinting into the fog like a pack of enraged beasts. 2,000 pairs of boots thundered against the ground, sounding like a coming storm. High above on the ridge, Lu Hanyan watched us, her hand resting on her bow. A small, almost invisible smile played on her lips. The hellish training had officially begun. That first day taught those veterans exactly what hell meant. They thought the 60-mile run was the end. When they finally limped back to the training grounds, gasping for air with legs like jelly, I was already waiting for them. I didn't give them a second to rest. Pair up, I ordered. 100 weighted squats. One man on the other's back. If you don't finish, you don't eat lunch. They looked at me like I was insane. Their bodies were already broken. But I didn't just talk. I grabbed a soldier named Lei Lai, a man who weighed at least 200 pounds, and hoisted him onto my shoulders as if he were made of straw. I began the squats. 1, 2, 10, 50, 100. My breathing stayed perfectly rhythmic. My face didn't even flush. When I set him down, I looked at the exhausted men. This is the standard, I said. Do it or leave. They gritted their teeth and began. Men collapsed at 50, then forced themselves back up. They were broken, but for the first time, I saw a new fire in their eyes. Most of the men eventually collapsed from pure exhaustion. But then there was Zhang Hu. He had a stubborn streak that wouldn't let him quit. Shaking like a leaf, he forced himself through those final reps until he hit 100. When he finally let his partner down and hit the dirt, he gasped for air, his legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. But he was smiling. He had actually done it. I didn't give them a moment to celebrate. Next was the tug of war. I had them use the thickest hemp ropes we had. The stakes were simple. The losing side got no lunch. Hunger is a powerful motivator. After a 60-mile run and 100 weighted squats, their stomachs were screaming. 1,000 men stood on each side. When I gave the order, 2,000 voices let out a roar that shook the trees. The rope snapped taut, groaning under the tension like it was about to shatter. They held each other in a dead heat for 15 minutes before the left side finally gained an inch, then a yard, and secured the win. The losers collapsed in despair. No lunch meant training on an empty stomach. I didn't show them a drop of mercy. In war, losing doesn't just mean going hungry, it means dying. That was the first rule of my new army, the Yen Wang Hall. By the afternoon, I moved them to the mud pits for low crawls. 500 meters of sludge and jagged rocks. I told them if anyone dared to lift their backside too high, an arrow would find them. My sixth sister-in-law, Hanyu, stood on the high platform. She was a master archer, and her longbow looked like a tool of the Grim Reaper in her hands. Begin, I shouted. 2,000 men dropped into the filth. They dragged themselves forward, skin tearing against the gravel. Blood mixed with the muddy water, turning the pits into a gruesome sight. Suddenly, a sharp was sliced through the air. An arrow grazed a soldier's scalp, taking a lock of hair with it. The man nearly jumped out of his skin. He had gotten lazy and lifted his hips. Next time, it won't be your hair, Hanyu's cold voice drifted down. She was terrifyingly accurate. Every shot she fired came within a hair's breadth of skin, never breaking it, but leaving the chilling scent of death in its wake. Arrows hissed through the air constantly. Some men were so terrified they wet themselves, while others gritted their teeth and pressed their faces into the mud. It took them 2 hours to crawl those 500 meters. When they finished, they looked like swamp monsters, unrecognizable under the filth. By the end of the day, half of my elite force was paralyzed with fatigue, lying on the ground like dying dogs. Instead of the usual camp rations, I fed them black cakes made of bean flour, dried meat, and medicinal herbs. "What is this?" one soldier grunted, frowning at the dry, hard brick in his hand. "Xingjuan pills," Leilai explained, chewing his own. "The second young mistress made these specially to restore your strength. Be grateful. This stuff is worth its weight in gold." It was a recipe I remembered from my past life, basically ancient power bars. As they ate, they felt a wave of heat spread from their stomachs, recharging their broken bodies. They realized then that while my training was hell, I was investing everything into their survival. But the day wasn't over. As night fell and torches were lit, I gathered them again. My shadow stretched long across the ground, and I felt a bloodthirsty heat rising in my chest. "From now on, you get 3 hours of sleep," I whispered, my voice carrying through the silent night like a demon's breath. "During the day, we train your bodies. At night, we train your souls to kill." I pointed toward the pitch-black forest behind me. It looked like a giant beast with its mouth wide open. "Go in pairs," I ordered. "Your mission is to find and kill your comrades without making a sound. Only those still standing at dawn get breakfast. As for the dead," I paused, my eyes cold, "you'll wish you had actually died." Hanyu nodded to me and vanished into the trees like a ghost. She was the judge, the referee, and the most dangerous hunter in those woods. Anyone who broke the rules or performed poorly would receive a gift from her, a paralytic needle that would keep them grounded for 3 days. The soldiers stared at the dark woods, a chill running up their spines. They realized I wasn't just training soldiers anymore. I was breeding predators. The forest was a wall of ink. Occasionally, pale moonlight broke through the clouds, casting jagged, ghostly shadows on the rotting leaves. The wind smelled of damp earth and wild animal musk. 2,000 men moved into the trees, hearts hammering against their ribs. "Old Wang, did you hear that?" a soldier whispered, his knuckles white as he gripped his wooden training blade. "Stop scaring yourself," his partner replied, though his own hand was trembling. Before he could finish the sentence, a faint zip sounded from the canopy above. They looked up, pupils shrinking, but they were too slow. 2 tiny silver needles struck their necks with surgical precision. "Oh crap," Old Wang muttered. His eyes rolled back, and he hit the forest floor with a dull thud. His partner followed a second later, both of them paralyzed before the hunt had even truly begun. One soldier was about to scream, but a cold arrow tip was already pressed against his throat. The edge was sharp, radiating a bone-chilling frost. He could feel it biting into the skin over his Adam's apple, a single warm bead of blood beginning to trickle down. One more inch, and he was a dead man. A black figure drifted down from the 10-meter-high canopy like a weightless leaf. She landed without disturbing a single fallen branch. It was my 6th sister-in-law, Hanyu. She wore tight black night gear, her face smeared with camouflage mud, blending perfectly into the void. Her eyes, terrifyingly bright even in the dark, stared at the terrified soldier without a shred of emotion. To her, he wasn't a man, he was a corpse. "Too much nonsense. Too loud," she said. Her voice carried no warmth. With a flick of her wrist, the soldier followed his companion's fate, collapsing limply to the ground. Hanyu didn't spare them a second glance. She vanished back into the darkness. For her, these woods were home. For these noisy rookies, they were just targets. Similar scenes played out in every corner of the forest. A piercing scream would ring out, only to be cut short instantly. "Who's there? Something's happening. Damn it, I can't see a thing." Panic spread like wildfire. These were veterans used to the grand scale of the open battlefield, charging, shouting, and clashing steel. For the first time, they realized that combat could be silent. It could be invisible. It could be absolute. Their pride in their raw strength and bravery meant nothing against these ghostly tactics. In less than 2 hours, over 300 men were hunted. They didn't know where the enemy came from or where they went. They only felt a sudden chill on their necks before the world went dark. "Hell, what is going on?" Zhanghu hissed. He was huddled in a thick thicket with a partner, barely daring to breathe. Just moments ago, they had watched a nearby squad get tripped by a mud-caked tripwire that was practically invisible. Before the men could even hit the dirt, two figures leaped from the grass and slit their throats with wooden blades. The entire process took less than 3 seconds. They moved like wraiths. These little brats played dirty. Zhang Hu cursed under his breath, sweat pouring down his forehead. He had killed men on the battlefield. He had seen rivers of blood. But he had never felt a fear like this, the fear of not knowing where the strike would come from. "Brother Hu, what do we do?" his partner whispered, his voice trembling. "We can't just hide. If we don't find a target by dawn, we're eliminated anyway." Zhang Hu frowned, his mind racing. He was a blunt man, but you don't survive a war on muscle alone. He gritted his teeth, a flash of ruthlessness in his eyes. "We stop being the prey," he muttered. "This forest is too big to just wander around. We'll be like headless flies. We need to lure them to us." "Lure them? How?" Zhang Hu scanned the area. His eyes landed on a tall, withered tree nearby. There was a natural hollow in the trunk, perfect for hiding, surrounded by a small patch of relatively open ground. A grim smile tugged at his lips. "We play a little game," he whispered, leaning in to brief his partner. The man's eyes lit up. "Brother Hu, that's brilliant." They moved fast. Zhang Hu had his partner hide inside the tree hollow while he set up a few crude traps around the perimeter, tripwires made of vines, and a few jagged stones positioned just right. It was simple, but in the pitch black, simple worked. Once finished, they smeared themselves in mud and crawled into the tall grass. They waited. They wanted these hunters to walk right into their jaws. "Ready?" Zhang Hu breathed. "Ready. Then start." His partner took a deep breath and let out a blood-curdling shriek. "Help! Snake! A snake bit me." The sound tore through the silent night, jagged and desperate. It was heart-wrenching, sounding exactly like a man in his final throes of agony. Zhang Hu nodded to himself. The kid had talent. The scream echoed through the trees, startling a few crows into the sky. "Brother Hu, you think it'll work?" the partner whispered nervously. "Just watch," Zhang Hu said confidently. "These guys are sharp, but they're soldiers. When they hear a comrade in trouble, someone won't be able to resist checking it out. The moment they show their heads, we strike." He gripped his wooden blade, muscles coiled like a leopard ready to spring. Sure enough, a faint rustle came from the grass nearby. Someone was coming. Zhang Hu's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to stay still. He held his breath, eyes locked on the movement. Two dark shadows approached cautiously. They were light on their feet, very careful, but in Zhang Hu's eyes, it was enough. 10 meters. 5 meters. 3. Now, Zhang Hu exploded from the grass. His wooden blade whistled through the air, aimed squarely at one of the shadows. "Die!" He put every ounce of his strength into the swing. The blade cut the air with a sharp howl. This was the strike he had used 1,000 times on the battlefield to cleave through enemies. It was fast, ruthless, and precise. He was certain that even a martial arts instructor would struggle to dodge it. But the moment his blade was about to connect, the two shadows moved in a way that defied logic. They blurred, splitting to either side with ghostly speed. Zhang Hu's strike hit nothing but air. The momentum carried him forward 2 steps. Before he could even process the miss, 2 cold wooden blades were pressed against his neck from opposite angles, left and right, like the twin sides of a reaper. Zhang Hu froze. His mind went blank. How? His strike was perfect, yet they had dodged it and countered him in less than a heartbeat. Were these even human beings? Too slow, too much noise, too much killing intent. A cold voice drifted from behind him. Zhang Hu turned his head with difficulty. Hanyu was standing right there, as still as a statue. She had a longbow drawn, an arrow leveled directly at the space between his eyebrows. Her eyes were like shards of ice, looking at him as if he were an idiot. "You lost," she said flatly. Zhang Hu and his partner felt their faces burn with shame. They thought they were being clever, but they were just children playing in the dark. They thought they were being clever, setting traps in the dark, but they were nothing more than a joke to those watching. Sixth young mistress, Zhang Hu stammered, his voice trembling with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "How did you find us?" He couldn't understand it. They had been so careful, They smeared mud over their skin to hide their scent and silhouette. They stayed low in the tall grass, holding their breath until their lungs burned. I could hear you from 300 paces away, Hanyu replied, pointing toward a large tree nearby. And your hiding spot was too obvious. No experienced hunter would ever fall for that. She walked over to the two soldiers who still had their wooden blades pressed against Zhang Hu's throat. She gave them a rare, sharp nod of approval. You did well. You knew how to exploit the enemy's mistakes to create an opening. The two soldiers beamed. These men were part of the first batch of seeds Hanyu had personally trained to act as the hunters in this deadly game. Hanyu turned back to Zhang Hu, whose face was still twisted in stubborn defiance. Her voice remained ice-cold. On a real battlefield, you would have died 10 times over by now. What you call clever is just a childish trick to your enemies. What you call bravery is nothing but reckless suicide to a true killer. She paused, her gaze cutting through Zhang Hu and his partner like a blade. Starting tomorrow, you two will follow me. I'm going to teach you what real sniping looks like. Zhang Hu froze. He expected a punishment for his failure, not a personal apprenticeship. His shock quickly turned into pure adrenaline. Thank you, sixth young mistress, he shouted, his partner joining in. They knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Meanwhile, I was standing on a massive jagged rock at the highest point of the valley. I stood there like a silent statue carved from the night itself. Sume stood beside me, just as quiet. The moonlight stretched my shadow across the stone as I looked down at the pitch-black forest below. To anyone else, it was just a dark woods. To me, it was a living map. Inside my mind, the Yama tactical map was running at high speed. I could see the terrain, the exact coordinates of all 2,000 soldiers, and their movement trajectories. I saw every clash and every ambush in real time, as if I were looking down from the heavens. I scanned the data. Current survivors, 1,647. Eliminated, 353. Average survival time, 47 minutes. Evaluation, qualified. A satisfied smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. For the first day, this performance exceeded my expectations. Is the intelligence organized? I asked, not turning my head. Yes, Sume replied. She pulled a thick stack of scrolls from her robe and handed them to me. 36 strongholds. Every bit of intel is in there. The people of Fengyu Pavilion didn't sleep a wink tonight, but we finished within your deadline. Her voice carried a hint of exhaustion she couldn't hide, but there was something else there, excitement. The thrill of accomplishing the impossible. I flipped through the pages. The scrolls were dense with details, geographic locations, personnel counts, defensive layouts, escape routes, and even the personality flaws of every commander in charge. Well done, I said. It was a rare compliment. Sume blinked, clearly surprised. How does it feel? I asked suddenly. Is it exciting? She let out a bitter laugh. Exciting? It's insane. I've run Fengyu Pavilion for years, and I've never mobilized every single asset we have to complete a mission like this in a single day. My secret agents probably think I've lost my mind. They'll thank you later, I said flatly. Because you just showed them that their limits are much higher than they imagined. I turned to look at her. In the moonlight, my eyes must have looked dangerous. People only explode with their true potential when they are pushed to the brink. Whether it's these 2,000 soldiers or your agents, I don't want tools that just follow orders. I want warriors who can create miracles in desperate situations. Sume fell silent. She looked at my face, realizing that I wasn't just training an army. I was training her. I was forcing everyone to break their limits in the most brutal way possible. When do you plan to move? She asked. Tomorrow night, I replied. After tomorrow, I want the entire capital to know exactly what happens to those who cross the Shao family. My voice was as cold as the depths of a frozen hell. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed from deep within the woods. It sliced through the silence of the night. Sume's hand flew to the short blade at her waist. Something's wrong. I laughed. It was a low, eerie sound. No, something is right. I pointed toward a section of the forest where shadows were moving rapidly. Look there. That group has already learned teamwork. They're using sound to lure the enemy into a kill zone. The technique is crude, but they're starting to use their heads. I watched with growing satisfaction. This was what I wanted for my Yama Hall. Not a bunch of meatheads who just charged forward, but a pack of thinking killing machines who achieved victory with the smallest possible price. Sume looked at me, a complex wave of emotion hitting her. She actually felt a flicker of pity for the enemies who would have to face this army. Wait, I remembered something. How is Hongxiu? Second sister-in-law says her condition is stable, Sume answered. But she'll need at least half a month to fully recover. Good, I nodded. Take care of her. The intelligence she provided is worth its weight in gold. And what about Madame Huang at the Drunken Moon Pavilion? Is she cooperating? Sume sneered. Very much so. She's desperate to tell us every secret she knows. She understands perfectly that the alternative to cooperation is much worse than death. Excellent. I slowly set the heavy scrolls down, my fingers tracing the edges of the paper with a soft rasping sound. Sume stood by my side, her black outfit blending into the night. Even from this distance, we could feel the invisible, cruel rhythm of the elimination game happening below us. Every muffled groan that drifted up was the sound of a predator catching its prey. It seems, Sume whispered, you have a lot of faith in Hanyu. Sume's voice remained as cold as ice, but I could hear a flicker of curiosity hidden beneath the frost. Maybe even a little confusion. She couldn't understand why I had entrusted Hanyu with such a heavy responsibility. Among all my sisters-in-law, Hanyu was the quietest, a woman who lived like a ghost in the shadows of the household. Yet, I had made her the vice commander of Yamahal, placing her in charge of our core tactical training. Sume prided herself on being a sharp judge of character, but this move baffled her. Sixth sister-in-law is a natural-born hunter, I said softly. My tone left no room for doubt. I kept my eyes locked on the forest below, watching the shadows shift as if I could see through the thick canopy to every bloody detail. She has an instinct for danger, a perfect sense of timing, and a level of patience that borders on the inhuman. She didn't lack talent. She just lacked a system that could push that talent to its limit. I paused, a meaningful smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. She was like a legendary bow paired with a common arrow. All I did was give her the sharpest bolt I could find to turn her into a god-tier marksman. Sume fell silent. Her eyes, usually filled with scrutiny and guarded suspicion, flickered with realization. She had to admit that my ability to read people was terrifying. She had lived with Hanyu for years and only knew her as a skilled but lonely swordswoman who cared for nothing but her bow. She had never imagined Hanyu possessed the potential I saw. It wasn't just Hanyu either. I saw the fiery spirit in Lu Hanyan, the raw power in Zhongli Yan, and the calculating mind of Wenryu. I even saw through Su Mei herself and her Windrain Pavilion. I had a way of seeing the essence of a person and placing them exactly where they belonged. It was a skill no 18-year-old boy should have. And what about you? Sume asked suddenly. She turned her head, looking at me directly without any mask of indifference. The moonlight hit her face, making her cold, elegant features look even paler and sharper. Who exactly are you? Her voice dropped lower, becoming as sharp as a hidden dagger aimed at my heart. What kind of soul is living inside that body? What is it you're really trying to do? She had been holding those questions back for a long time. From the moment I argued with the inspectors at the funeral hall to the way I seized control of the training grounds, I was a different person. The ninth son she remembered was a coward who turned red just talking to people. I wasn't just a changed man. I was a stranger. I was a mystery, a treasure chest of impossible ideas and ruthless methods. My gaze, my presence, and my tactics didn't belong to a teenager. They belonged to an old monster who had clawed his way through mountains of corpses for decades. I didn't avoid her gaze. I turned slowly to face her, meeting her suspicious, guarded eyes. Our stares collided in the air, hers cold as a blade, mine deep as an abyss. The night wind whipped my black robes around me, making them snap like a flag. Suddenly, I let out a bright smile. In the cold moonlight, it looked almost blinding. Me? I pointed at myself, my grin widening as if she had asked the most ordinary question in the world. I'm Xiao Chun, the ninth son of the Xiao family, your brother-in-law. I spoke with a playful edge to my voice. I'm just a man who wants to avenge his father and brothers. A man who wants to make sure all of you live well. It was an answer that explained nothing. Su Mei's brow furrowed, and a flash of irritation crossed her eyes. She hated being toyed with. "Don't give me that nonsense," she hissed, her voice turning into a deep-sea chill that seemed to freeze the air. "Those methods, those ideas, no 18-year-old has them. What are you hiding?" She took a step toward me, her hand instinctively resting on the short blade at her waist. It was a defensive posture. When faced with the unknown, her first reaction was always to prepare for a fight. "Does it matter?" I asked. The smile faded from my face, replaced by a terrifyingly calm expression. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a hurricane hits. "Third sister-in-law." My voice wasn't loud, but it carried an invisible pressure that felt like a mountain descending on her shoulders. "Is it really that important who I am?" I took a step forward. Sume instinctively backed up half a step, her grip tightening on her blade. But I didn't keep pushing. I stopped and looked up at the full moon. The light caught the sharp angles of my face. "What matters," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "is that I can lead the Shao family out of this dead end. What matters is that I can get revenge for our fallen kin. What matters?" I turned my head back, my dark eyes staring straight into hers. "Is that I can make sure you and the 300,000 brothers of the Northern Army can live with dignity." Each word was like a heavy hammer slamming into Sume's heart. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. Every blow hit home. Sume's body trembled slightly. Her lips moved, but she found she couldn't say a single word. She realized I was right. Did it really matter who I was? I still carried the name Shao. I was still part of the family. I was still the one risking my life for this home. That was enough. Sume started, her voice dry. She realized how ridiculous her suspicions were in the face of what needed to be done. "I understand." She took a deep breath and slowly dropped to one knee. She did it willingly, looking as if a great weight had been lifted from her. "From this day forward," she said, her cold eyes finally igniting with a spark of fanatical loyalty, "the Wind Rain Pavilion follows the orders of the 9th brother alone." Her voice was no longer cold. It was firm, filled with a conviction she had never shown before. "Sume awaits your command." I looked down at her and nodded. I knew that from this moment on, the sharpest hidden blade of the Shao family was firmly in my hand. I reached out and patted her shoulder gently. "Stand up, third sister-in-law. You're going to be very busy." A cold arc formed on my lips. "Our first stop tomorrow night is the Jibao Pavilion." Sume stood up, but she froze when she heard the name. The Jibao Pavilion was the largest stronghold of the Sahaitong merchant group in Yinmen Pass. The hunt was finally beginning. Jibao Pavilion was more than just a shop. It was the nerve center of the Shao family's intelligence network and the heart of the most corrupt secrets in the north. Every day, high-ranking officials and wealthy merchants filtered through its doors, trading favors and hiding filth. This was where I would make my first move. "9th brother," Sume whispered, her voice trembling with genuine concern. "The connections behind Jibao Pavilion are deep. The governor's office, the city guards, even the military has people on their payroll. If we touch them, I'm afraid their private army will." "Afraid of what?" I cut her off, turning to face her. My eyes burned with a dangerous light. "Afraid they'll act like cornered dogs? Afraid the imperial court will be furious?" My voice grew colder with every word until it was like shards of ice. "Third sister-in-law, remember one thing. From the moment my father and brothers died at Yinmen Pass, it became a fight to the death. They want the Shao family's army and our lives. I want their heads." I turned my back to her, staring into the darkness. "I'm going to show them if the Shao family's blade is still sharp enough to kill." The next night, the air was still. While my new recruits in the palace of the underworld were deep in the mountains, hunting each other in the dark to sharpen their killing instincts, a real slaughter was about to begin in the city. Jibao Pavilion sat like a fortress. Its 3-story redwood building loomed over the streets, elegant but imposing under the moonlight. The walls were 10 feet high, topped with jagged glass and iron spikes that glinted like cold teeth. The heavy red gates were shut tight, guarded by 2 stone lions that looked ready to swallow anyone who dared approach. Usually, this place was a beehive of activity, but tonight, it was deathly silent. Inside the back courtyard, a lean, middle-aged man named Wu San paced his study. Sweat soaked his forehead. His face was ghostly pale. "Damn it, That idiot Qianjun. Wu San cursed under his breath, his hands shaking. How did he get himself killed by a sickly brat like Xiao Chun? Kicked to death? It's impossible. He tried to pick up a teacup, but his fingers trembled so violently he had to set it back down. Qianjun's death was a death sentence hanging over all the Sahaitong merchant strongholds. Wu San had already sent desperate messages to Governor Zhao Defong and contacts in the capital, but help was too far away. The news coming from the North Camp was terrifying. The weak, hiding ninth young master was gone. In his place was a predator. He had executed a commander, purged the ranks, and built a unit called the Palace of the Underworld. Wu San knew this madman wouldn't stop. I can't wait, Wu San hissed, his eyes filling with desperate resolve. He hurried to a hidden compartment in his desk and pulled out a messenger pigeon. It was pure white with eerie, blood-red eyes, a bird trained for the highest level of secrecy. With a trembling hand, he scribbled 8 words on a scrap of paper. Plan exposed. Destroy everything immediately. He had to warn the other cells to burn the ledgers. As long as the records of bribes and illegal trades were gone, Xiao Chun could scream to the heavens, and it wouldn't matter. There would be no proof. Wu San rolled the paper tight, slid it into the tube on the bird's leg, and pushed open the carved wooden window. A gust of early spring chill hit him, making him shiver. He lifted the pigeon, ready to toss it into the night sky. Zip! A sound so faint it was almost a whisper cut through the dark. To a normal person, it was just the wind. To a man like Wu San, who lived on the edge of a blade, it was the sound of the reaper. His pupils shrank. He tried to duck, but he was too slow. Before the pigeon could even spread its wings, its body jerked. The red light in its eyes vanished instantly. The bird fell like a stone, pinned to the window frame by a pitch-black arrow with a blood-red fletching. The force was so immense the heavy redwood frame cracked, sending splinters flying. The arrowhead buried itself 3 inches deep into the wood. Wu San's blood ran cold. The sheer strength and precision required for that shot were inhuman. Assassins. There are assassins. Wu San screamed with every lungful of air he had left. His voice shattered the silence of the night, filled with pure, unadulterated terror. But the scream died in his throat. Zip! A second black arrow hissed through the dark, faster and more brutal than the first. It streaked through the open window like a ghost. It tore through the center of Wu San's throat, snapping his spine and protruding from the back of his neck. Wu San's eyes bulged. He clutched at his throat, trying to stop the fountain of blood, but his strength was gone. He slumped to the floor, staring at the ceiling as the world turned black. The arrowhead was covered in bright red blood and bits of white bone. Blood sprayed like a fountain, pulsing through the gaps in Wu San's fingers. In seconds, his expensive silk robe was stained a deep, messy crimson. His eyes were wide, bulging so far out of their sockets I thought they might actually pop. His mouth hung open, trying to form words, but all that came out was a wet, gurgling sound. He swayed for a moment, stumbling back 2 steps before hitting the floor with a heavy thud. The blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the priceless Persian carpet and turning it a dark, bruised purple. Even as the light faded from his eyes, he couldn't understand how it happened. How had the shooter killed the pigeon and then, in less than half a breath, fired a second lethal shot? That wasn't just skill. That was the work of a god of death. Up on the roof, Hanyu slowly lowered his longbow. He stood there expressionless, the moonlight catching his black night gear and giving it a cold, metallic sheen. A black veil covered his face, leaving only his eyes visible, eyes as sharp and freezing as winter stars. His breathing remained steady. His heart didn't skip a beat. To him, those 2 lethal arrows were no more significant than throwing away scraps of straw. Standing beside him were a dozen dark guards from the Wind and Rain Pavilion, the elite archers under Su Mei's command. They looked at Hanyu with pure awe and terror. These were men trained to be the best in the martial world, but they knew they were nowhere near his level. They had seen it all clearly. The first arrow hit a tiny, moving target held by a panicked man and pinned it to a frame. That required a perfect calculation of wind, distance, and trajectory. But the second arrow was even more terrifying. The gap between the 2 shots was non-existent. In less than half a heartbeat, Hanyu had notched, drawn, aimed, and fired. Wu San had tried to duck the moment the bird died, but the arrow had predicted his movement perfectly, sealing his fate before he even moved. "Sixth lady," one of the guards whispered, his voice trembling with respect. "Your archery, it's just—" He trailed off, unable to find a word big enough for what he'd just witnessed. "No talking during the mission," Han Yu said coldly. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. "The job isn't done yet." He turned his icy gaze toward the guards. "Remember what the young master said. This must be fast, ruthless, and absolute. Leave no one alive." "Yes," the guards replied in a low, murderous chorus. Down in the courtyard, the guards of the Great Treasure Pavilion finally reacted to Wu San's dying scream. The silence of the night shattered. "What happened?" "The manager is in trouble." To the backyard. Assassins. Dozens of guards armed with blades and staffs rushed from the shadows, heading for the study. These weren't amateurs. The Four Seas Chamber of Commerce paid top dollar for these men, famous mercenaries and killers who had all tasted blood. They looked fierce, their faces twisted in rage, their weapons gleaming under the moon. But they barely made it into the center of the courtyard before the air began to hiss. Asterisk zip, 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 asterisk. A barrage of arrows rained down like a swarm of black locusts from the rooftops and walls. They moved so fast they were practically invisible, leaving only faint black streaks in the air. It sounded like the reapers singing a low, rhythmic song of harvest. The screams started instantly. The guards didn't even know where the attacks were coming from before the arrows found their marks. Some were hit in the throat, clutching their necks as blood geysered out, their bodies twitching on the stones. Others were struck through the heart, the arrows punching clean through their chests and out their backs. They died with their eyes wide open, staring at nothing.